During hunting season, at least once a year, I try to travel up to Maine and rent an Airbnb to go hunting. I never bought my own place because I can't really afford it just for a single trip every year, so doing a weekend rental makes more sense for me. Plus, I'm not exactly an expert. I'm still trying to get more experience. Some years I'd go with my uncle, but in recent years he hasn't been in the best shape health-wise and he's not really up to it anymore, so I've been going alone more recently. Last year, which was 2022 at the time I'm writing this, was the last season that I went hunting. It was November. The Airbnb I rented was near a national park. I arrived late on a Friday because I had to come home from work, get ready, then head out on the road trip. When I pulled up into the long stretch of private dirt road to get to the cabin-type Airbnb, it was pitch black outside, and it was dead silent too. This time of year there's obviously no bugs or crickets left, so the nights are dead silent and dark up there, especially if the place you're staying is secluded like this one. I pulled up as close as I could to the cabin, and the owner told me the key would be hidden under the mat. Sure enough, it was there. I brought my 2 bags inside the cabin and unpacked my things onto the bed in the 1 bedroom. It was a very cozy cabin, and the owner already had the heat turned up for me, which was nice. Maine gets pretty cold up there in November. There was cable and Wi-Fi in this Airbnb, so I set an alarm to get an early start at dawn, which in my opinion is the best time to find deer or even moose if you're lucky. The next morning, I was up as soon as my alarm went off, and I was out in the woods in less than half an hour. Since this was foreign territory to me, I posted up behind a blowdown I found, some knocked over trees. Usually this would now be a waiting game, but I heard a man's voice call from behind me. I had a mini heart attack and turned around to see some man with gray hair, but who looked like he was only 50. He was approaching me slowly. He said slowly in a very angry sounding voice, "What the hell are you doing here?" I responded, "Excuse me?" He said, "Hunting is restricted here." I actually was unaware of this, and when I explained this to him, he said, "I watched you ride up here. You best leave the way you came." This scared me. I said, "What do you mean you watched me ride up here?" He told me he always sees people riding up to that cabin, always out of town folk who come up here for the wrong reasons. I apologized to him and told him I'd leave. I grabbed my things and started walking back the way I came, and when I looked behind me, the man was gone, out of sight. I walked back to the cabin, then took my car and drove to a different park that according to some website allowed hunting. I posted up there and had a failure of a first half of the day. Around midday, I went back to the cabin to just regroup and have a meal. But when I got back to the cabin, I found that the door was unlocked. I could have sworn I locked it before. When I got inside, I was almost positive certain things had been moved around and the zipper to my bag was unzipped. I couldn't remember if I left it zipped up or not, but it was typical for me to always keep my bag zipped up. I just checked every room quick before settling down. I was way too hungry to just prepare a light meal, so I drove to the little village nearby and picked up some Chinese takeout. Then I drove right back to the cabin. I was planning on heading back out to the park at dusk. When I got back to the cabin, I just ate my food and went straight to take a nap. After my nap, I headed back out to the park. I spent about an hour walking maybe a quarter mile very slowly, and I wasn't finding anything. My uncle always told me you could find a deer or moose in 10 minutes or 10 days. It just depends on how many are present and being in the right place at the right time. Sadly, luck was not on my side this day, and so when it was starting to get dark, I packed up and started heading back to my truck. It was just a short drive back to the cabin. I cooked the pasta and meatballs I brought with me for dinner as I had the TV on in the background. Then I laid down on the little love seat couch as I ate and watched some old black and white movie. While sitting there, I thought back to earlier, how the door was unlocked and things appeared to have been moved. Only I didn't notice anything missing. I wondered if it was just in my head or not. Not long after this, I brushed my teeth and shifted to the bedroom where I began to watch another movie in there, planning on falling asleep to it. I was starting to drift into that half-sleep state, where what was going on in the movie was actually starting to blend into this half-awake dream I was kind of having, until I heard the distinct sound of a door clicking open that snapped me out of my half-sleep. I groggily looked up and noticed the closet door in the room was now cracked open. This immediately woke me up completely. Now, the door being unlocked and belongings potentially being moved did not seem like a coincidence. I waited a moment, then got out of bed, went to my hunting pack, and grabbed my CZ75. I went back to the bedroom, turned on the light, and pointed my gun at the closet door. I yelled, "Come out now or I'll shoot." A big part of me still didn't believe there could actually be a person in there, and I thought that I was just being overly cautious. But when the door actually pushed open, I was in pure shock. That older man from earlier in the day stepped out, and his unhappy-looking face switched to a gross smile, missing a front tooth. He said, "You got me." I said don't move as I went to grab my cell phone and call 911. Thank God I had service here. The sheriff's department was on their way, and I let them know I was armed and had the intruder at gunpoint. It was an excruciatingly long wait before the sheriff's deputies arrived. During that time, the man was telling me how he's sick of people like me having no respect for the parks up here. I had no idea what he meant, but I wasn't entertaining him. I kept telling him to shut up. When deputies got there, it was an obvious arrest for breaking and entering and possibly robbery, though I don't think he ever actually stole anything from me. The man claimed the door was simply unlocked, though I don't know if that was true or if he had somehow picked a lock or even climbed through a window. The Airbnb host said that there were no other hidden keys and that I definitely left the door unlocked. He seemed more concerned about whether anything of his was stolen and putting blame on me as opposed to asking me if I was okay and apologizing for the experience. He said he had no idea who the man could have been, even after getting his name. I still don't think I left the door unlocked, but thank God I was on a hunting trip and had my firearms with me to quickly neutralize the threat. I was 14 when this story took place. It was my first year hunting deer with my family. To be specific, my father, my cousin, and myself. To paint a picture, my blind was 2 miles south of my father's, with his stand being 9 miles southwest to my camp. We drove a four-wheeler about 100 yards away from his stand, which left me with a while to walk before I even got to mine. I live in northern Michigan, and during the winter it gets dark quickly and early. It was around 4 p.m. when I started to get cold and decided to close up my tent. I was hunting with a .243 rifle that had a pink camo cover on it with a strap around so I could hang it off my back. I closed up my blind zippers and put my garbage away in a bucket I had. As I was throwing away my trash, I heard a couple leaves crumble, so I immediately turned my head up to see if it was a deer. After about a minute, I brushed it off as a squirrel or a bird. Disappointed, I closed my blind and headed to my father's. As I was taking my first steps out of my blind, I could see a fresh pathway brush through the leaves. It was a wide path, not from a small animal or even a deer. I immediately started thinking a bear or a wolf, so I started speed walking to where my dad was. I started to panic as it started to get even darker and I was still roughly a mile away. I was just walking as I was stopped in my tracks by one of the most haunting and horrifying noises I'd ever heard. The best way to describe it was a bear/man that was being murdered. It sounded roughly 150 yards back as I started to run. Running with boots and thick hunting gear was hard with 20 pounds on my back, but fear pushed me through and I didn't stop. Around 25 seconds later, I was still running when I heard it again. This time it was louder and closer. At this point, it was completely dark out, with the moon being the only source of light. I turned around with my headlight, and what I saw is still the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Around 50 yards away, I saw a black figure in the dark, illuminated by the moonlight behind it. It was around 10 feet tall and skinny. Without thinking twice, I started running while trying to get my gun off my back. I didn't know where I was running, but I just ran. I ended up on a road that I recognized as Rabbit Road, the road that connects my camp with the entrance to the hunting area. I ran on the road until I got to my camp. By the time I got into sight of my cabin, I turned around again and saw it again, this time further away. It was still standing up, and I can only describe it as a tall, black, skinny figure. It had long arms and long legs. As I got on my cabin steps, I threw up from exhaustion and continued to vomit for about a minute, as I later then passed out. I woke up to the sound of my dad's four-wheeler turning into the cabin driveway. I started crying as I ran up to him, hugging him. I quickly told him the story of what happened and how I ran back without stopping. He didn't believe me at first, but as we got settled inside, his face started to change as he saw the desperation in my eyes. I didn't sleep that night, or for weeks after. People have told me it was most likely a bear or I was just seeing things, but I know what I saw. I'm older now, and I only hunt with someone with me. I also hunt with a bigger gun because it gives me reassurance that I could shoot something larger. As I'm writing this was the most scary experience of my life. It was a Friday evening and I was getting home from school. I was 13 years old and was really excited to go hunting. I love hunting, especially the ranch we go to in Alice, Texas. I've been going there since I was 4, and I have so many memories of the place. It was my grandpa, my dad, and I going. There were going to be a few other people, like the ranch owner's family. We were packed up and ready to go. It was deer season, my favorite season. Just the feeling of seeing a big deer right in front of your eyes is a wonderful feeling, and of course shooting it. People say that it's wrong to kill animals, but I disagree if you're actually eating it. We got to the ranch and it was 10 p.m., so it was pretty dark out there. The ranch is 300 acres, I believe, and the campsite is an old little shack, probably the size of a normal bedroom. There is electricity there, but it's not a huge cabin where most hunters sleep in. However, there are little beds there, but one time my dad found a huge snake shed in one of the beds when I was little, so from then on we sleep in a tent. The camp is surrounded by woods, with a little field up ahead, probably a little less than the size of a football field. We use that field for dove hunting. Anyhow, we unloaded and chatted for a while around the campfire, telling jokes and whatnot, when we heard this scream. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard. It sounded like a human hybrid or something. The scream sounded not too far away. All of us jumped from our seats and looked at each other. Every man there was freaked out. I could see it in their eyes. The ranch owner was the first one to say, "What the fuck was that?" He then told us and one of his family members to go check it out. He's a pretty old guy in his 70s, so that's why we went to go check it out. We took my grandpa's ATV and did a quick search around the perimeter, only to find nothing. I was still traumatized, and I was even scared to go in the blind by myself. As all hunters know, we have to wake up before dawn and get up into the blind to be unseen by the deer. I went to sleep in the tent with a gun right beside me. I woke up to the alarm and got ready. I was scared of being left alone in the dark, even though it was only an hour or two before dawn breaks. I was still petrified by the scream, and it still echoed in my mind today. My grandpa dropped me off at the blind with his ATV and left. My dad was already in his position. My grandpa's not a soft grandpa. He expects you to know it and do it. Him being him, he just left me in the dark, expecting me to find my way up to the blind myself. So I began climbing up the ladder and began navigating with just my hands. I got into the blind and waited for the sun to peek out. 20 minutes passed and it was still dark out when I noticed something in the middle of the trail. I couldn't see well, so I thought it was the right time to use a night vision sight that my uncle had given me. I was excited, expecting a big deer, but when I put my eye into the sight, what I saw still haunts me today. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I was expecting a deer, only to find a person walking towards the woods. It was distorted looking, but had the same outline of a person. I don't know how it spotted me, but I saw it turn and face towards me. Now the night vision is not super clear, so I couldn't see its face, but I could see it was looking straight at me. Then what I heard next will stick with me for the rest of my life. It gave out the same exact blood-curdling scream as the night before, only louder. At that moment, I cannot describe the fear I felt. The word fear is not enough to describe how I felt. I managed to break free from whatever shock I was in, and managed to grab the .22 and started to fire the entire clip into the path it was standing in. I was still frightened, so I got my rifle and fired all the rounds into the path. When I looked back into the night vision, it was gone. I started to get texts and calls like crazy, mostly from my dad. I told him what happened, and he had heard it too, and so did my grandpa. We still go there to hunt, but it has not been the same peaceful hunt. Now when I hunt, I go with my dad, because I'm scared that thing might come back. I don't know what that thing was, but whatever it was, it survived 25 rounds from a .22 and 4 rounds from a .243. Because when we went to go check, there were no signs of blood or anything, not even footprints. I know it was still dark when I fired all those rounds, but I know for sure at least one of them had to hit whatever that thing was. It was the fall of 1986. I was 23 years old. I'd never really been scared in the woods before, honestly. I always felt like the wilderness was my safe place, somewhere I could go and relax and get away from the stresses of life. I've never seen a Bigfoot or skinwalker or any kind of boogeyman in the woods. As a lineman for a small town in West Kentucky, I have seen crazy. Being a small muni, we all had to wear a lot of hats, including utility disconnects. It wasn't fun, but it was part of the job, and there was a lot of crazy, but never in the woods. My only real hobbies were hunting and fishing. Back then, it was easy to find a really good place to hunt just by stopping and asking the landowner for permission. Most were eager to have the deer population thinned out, as they were really destructive, eating young soybean crops. And this was coal country, and back in the 50s there was a lot of strip mining that left a lot of land unusable for building and farming, so much of it was open for hunting. It was October 1986. Daylight savings time hadn't happened yet, and it was still daylight till just after 7 p.m. I left work at 4 and ran home to change into my camo. It was bow season in Kentucky, my favorite season. I was gonna hunt in an area that was special to me. It was in an area we'll call Coon Ridge. This was a very remote area with broken farmland and wooded areas. After parking, I decided not to unload my three-wheeler and just walk the 3/4 of a mile to where I was going to hunt. I was using a Summit climbing stand, so I had to carry my stand and my bow, as well as my fanny pack with my knife and flashlight. I had to walk halfway around the cornfield. The corn had not been cut yet, so I stayed in the lane left by the farmers so that they could get their equipment to the upper end of the field. The field was rectangular, and the upper end was a much higher elevation than the bottom, where I had to cross a creek with shin-deep water to enter the field. At the top of the field, the right-hand corner was where I was going to enter the woods. It was the highest point of the field. I had to pick my way through a thick blackberry thicket, but managed to find a game trail that led me through, and it finally opens into a hillside with large trees. After finding a tree suitable for my climbing stand, getting set up, and a little climb, I was ready to hunt. I love to watch nature. The deer hunting was just an excuse to be in the woods. As a lineman, I had no fear of climbing high, so I would get as high as I could. This time I was up around 20 feet before the canopy started blocking my view. It was around 5:30 when I was settled in my stand and had an arrow nocked. I regularly stayed in my permanent stands late as not to spook deer close by. I had added reflective tape along the trail to mark the way out. This made it easier to find my permanent stands at night. But this day, I was in my climbing stand in an area I hadn't been in at night. I was about to start down when I heard something walking, so I waited. It sounded like a deer in the thicket, but I never really could get a look at it. It was 8 o'clock and close to a full moon that night, so from my high vantage point, I could see pretty good in the woods, and I felt like I could still shoot up to 15 yards, but it was after shooting hours, so I started down. As I did, I could hear the loud crashing of a deer that must have spotted me moving like a sloth down the tree. On the ground, I quickly secured my stand and bow and looked in the direction of the way I came in. I turned on my flashlight. Now the woods look different at night in the dark, and downright foreign when you turn on your flashlight. It's not bad in a mature woods with no undergrowth, but I was walking into a thicket. I walked along the edge of the thicket for a while, trying to find the trail I came in on, but no luck. It was almost 9 o'clock now, and I was ready to get out, so I just started picking my way through the thicket, keeping the moon on my right shoulder, and finally I came out into the field about 25 yards from where I went in. As I stood there picking the thorns out of my hands and legs, thinking this adventure was over, I surveyed the lane around the field, and in the light of the pale moon, I saw it. Now when I walked in, I came up the left side of the field around 200 yards to the end, turned right, and walked another 100 yards. And where I was, it was higher on the ground, and I could see around the field where I came in. When I walked in, there was nothing in the trail. I hadn't heard any equipment or ATVs, so I was shocked to see something in the trail. And no small something either. It looked 6 feet wide and 6 feet tall, just standing there about halfway up the field trail. It was the only way out, so I never hesitated. I started walking back to the trail, turned toward whatever it was standing there, hoping it was just a strange shadow, but it wasn't. I grabbed an arrow from the quiver, remembering my knife was in my three-wheeler. I walked fast and never broke stride. 100 yards away, and it didn't move or make a sound. I walked loudly straight towards it for 200 yards, all the while thinking it's really there, in my trail, blocking my only way out. As I got closer, I could make out what it was. It was 2 people standing side by side, and this unnerved me even more. It was 9:15, 40 degrees out here. Nobody should be here. I kept walking, now 20 yards away. and I see that it's a guy and girl, maybe 20 years old. 10 yards away, I'm walking towards them, but no sounds from them. They just stood there. When I got to them, I half expected them to jump me, but they never moved. I said, "Kinda cold out here, ain't it?" No sound. They still never moved. I kept walking. I turned to keep an eye on them. I was thinking, okay, this is it. They never turned around, never even moved their heads. I crossed the creek, and within another 100 yards, I made it back to my truck. I was even more uneasy approaching my truck. It was just so quiet. All I could think of was someone waiting to ambush me, so I kinda eased up on it very quietly and watched it for maybe 3 minutes before approaching it. It seemed fine, so I headed to my truck. As I left, I tried to figure out how they got here, because I never saw another vehicle. I tried to just put it behind me. But the next day at work, during lunch, I was gonna run and get some food, when I noticed all 4 of my tires on my truck were low, and after inspecting them, they all had around 10 to 15 roofing nails in them. I had to put tubes in them to get home. Something odd was going on in those woods. Somebody most certainly did this to my tires while I was parked in them. After this, it always felt like someone was watching me when I was hunting in that area. That's why I stopped going alone, and I never parked off the main gravel road again. I never found out who those 2 young people were, or who punctured my tires. Before getting into today's stories, I'd like to take a moment to thank this video's sponsor, pi.org. If you're anything like me, then that means you can't stand browsing the web with annoying pop-ups and ads constantly clogging up your screen. We've all heard of ad blockers, but the one that I've been using lately is pi.org, which is a superior ad blocker that sweeps away all those annoying pop-ups and ads, including those annoying cookie pop-ups from websites wanting to collect your information. This is how websites are able to show you ads centered around what you've been Googling. A cool feature is visual mode, which allows you to watch all of the ads on the page you're on actually disappearing to let you visualize how much space you're saving. In my opinion though, the coolest part of pi.org is the rewards for ads program, in which when you enable it, you can earn cash back for seeing pi-approved ads. And you'll also receive cash back when making a transaction through a cashback offer while online shopping. So for a genuinely better ad-free experience, just go to pi.org/Mr. Nightmare, click Add to Chrome, and just follow the on-screen steps to complete the setup. And also add the Pi Shopping Companion extension for coupons, cashback, and rewards. When I was a kid, around 9 or 10, my dad got a really high-paying job that forced us to move from middle-of-nowhere Pennsylvania to Brookmont, Maryland. I say forced, but that's probably not the best way to describe what happened. In reality, my parents were thrilled to make the move. It was a decision they barely thought about. In the span of about a month, we went from this tiny, rundown house in a relatively low-income area to a massive property in one of Maryland's nicest suburbs. You might be wondering how I felt about the whole thing. At that age, I was a pretty antisocial kid and mostly kept to myself, so it's not like I was leaving any lifelong friends behind. I didn't really have any to begin with. Years later, my parents would tell me that the prospect of giving me a fresh start was one of the reasons they were so willing to uproot our entire lives, but that's neither here nor there. The move didn't bother me much, and I was able to adjust pretty quickly. It's not like adjusting was very difficult given the circumstances though. Like I said, the house was huge, and even my 10-year-old self could pick up on the fact that we wouldn't be struggling to make ends meet anymore. I'm not going to bore you about the pointless details about the inside of the house. I'll only tell you what you need to know. I had 2 older brothers, Sean and Harold. The backyard was easily our favorite part. It had a big plot of twisting hedges that made for perfect games of hide and seek, tag, or whatever else we came up with. But the best feature by far was the treehouse at the right edge of the property. Each house on the block was separated by a decently large cluster of tall trees, and the treehouse was situated directly within that patch. I say treehouse, but it was more like a tree castle. It wasn't your dad's run-of-the-mill weekend project. It was massive, spanning 6 or 7 adjacent trees. It had 3 different levels and an actual staircase built into it, not those flimsy planks you're probably used to seeing. It was obvious a professional had built it. For a while, my brothers and I played in the treehouse every day. It was always the highlight of our day. But eventually, my brothers got bored of the treehouse. They were older and in that awful teenage phase where nothing was cool anymore. Eventually, I was the only one who played up there, which kind of sucked. I was really torn up about basically being abandoned up there, but my brothers refused to come back no matter what I said. One day, I climbed up into the treehouse and found a folded piece of paper sitting in the corner. To this day, I still remember the exact words written on that first note. It said, "Hello, I'm the Marshmallow Man. It's nice to meet you. What's your name?" I was the happiest kid alive. I assumed it was one of my brothers playing a game with me, so I played along, hoping to re-interest them in the treehouse. There was a stack of paper in the treehouse that hadn't been there before, so I eagerly picked up one of the markers we had in there and wrote back, leaving a little note with my name. I placed it where I had found the first one, excited to play this new game. That night, I wanted to ask my brothers which of them was the Marshmallow Man, but I was afraid they'd stop playing if I said anything, so I kept quiet. For the next few days, I'd come home from school and run straight to the treehouse. Each time, there'd be another note waiting for me. At first, the notes were innocent and sounded exactly like stuff my brothers would say. I was having a lot of fun with it, but as the days went on, the notes got stranger. The Marshmallow Man started asking me increasingly personal questions that I didn't fully understand. Things that didn't make sense for my brothers to ask, like, what's your favorite time of day to play outside? Or what do you usually eat for breakfast? I don't remember every question he asked, but one of them that will always stick with me was, which window in the house is your bedroom? I look back at that exact question and literally feel sick to my stomach. At the time, I still didn't think too much of it. I assumed it was still one of my brothers, so I answered every question without hesitation. But the next note was so unsettling that I couldn't keep quiet anymore. It was something like, "What do your pajamas smell like?" or something nasty along those lines. I stormed inside and confronted my brothers, demanding to know which of them was behind the notes. They both started laughing at me and denied it. Both of them swore there was no such thing as the Marshmallow Man and started making fun of me for still playing make-believe. I started crying and ran out of the room. I remember being a mixture of sad and angry. I knew one of them had to be lying. Instead of going to my parents, I hatched a plan to catch them in the act. I was not prepared for what was about to happen. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard tapping at my window. I froze, feeling my heart start to beat out of my chest. I was already scared of the dark to begin with, so the tapping added a layer of fear that I couldn't deal with. I sat there in the dark for what felt like hours, too scared to move. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I pulled back the window curtains and almost screamed. Taped to the outside of my window were dozens of marshmallows. It had to be my brothers. I was so angry, this wasn't funny anymore. I decided I'd catch them red-handed the next night. I pretended like I hadn't noticed the marshmallows and didn't say a thing to either of them all day. Later that night, I was ready. When the tapping started again, I jumped out of bed and yanked the curtains open, ready to yell at them. But it wasn't my brothers. On the other side of the glass was a man, an old, disgusting man with yellow eyes and what looked like rotting teeth. He had patchy hair on his head and smiled at me when he noticed me looking. I don't think I've ever screamed louder in my life. I felt like I was gonna die in that moment. My parents came running, but by the time they got to my room, the man was gone. It was a huge thing. The police searched the property, combing through every inch of the yard and treehouse, but they didn't find anything. They even checked the surrounding area, but that man was never found. Some of our neighbors came outside to see what was going on and reacted in horror when my parents filled them in. I told the police and my parents everything I knew, but there wasn't much I could even say. They took the notes in as evidence, but I doubt they really did anything with them. That man never came back. My parents told me to never play in the treehouse again, but it's not like I wanted to after that incident anyway. I moved out of that house a while ago, but my parents still live there. and I always take an extra long look at the treehouse whenever I'm back. This remains one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. This memory has been on my mind a lot lately. My youngest son Luke just went off to college, and while I'm proud of him, the house feels quieter than it ever has before. Too quiet, if I'm being honest. It's funny, when the kids are young, you dream of peace and quiet, but when it finally comes, it's not as comforting as you thought it would be. I don't know why, but his going away unlocked a part of my brain that honestly forgot about what I'm about to tell you. People have told my wife and I that it's normal to be thinking a little extra about memories from my kid's childhood at a time like this, so I guess it's not too surprising. I still remember when he was just a little kid, full of energy and curiosity, always getting into something. There's one memory I have of that time that is definitely not all sunshine and rainbows though. Luke was 8 years old when this happened. Even now, I can't fully make sense of it. I'm a carpenter by trade, so I'm pretty good with my hands. Always have been. I will admit that I was much more lively back then, willing to undertake all sorts of makeshift projects and such. One of my favorite projects was the treehouse I built for Luke in the backyard, which is still standing to this day. It wasn't just a simple platform nailed to a tree. I poured my heart into it. Walls, a roof, proper wooden steps leading up to the entrance. It was sturdy too. I wanted it to feel like an extension of our house to him, and I definitely succeeded in that regard. My wife Christy wasn't thrilled about it at first. She worried it was too high off the ground and unsafe. But Luke was the kind of kid who was always climbing trees anyway, and I figured it would be safer to give him a proper ladder rather than let him scramble up branches that could snap. Christy eventually came around, and Luke absolutely loved it. I should probably tell you a little bit about our property so that the story makes more sense. Our house was at the very end of a dead-end street in a relatively woodsy area. The backyard actually bordered the woods, which was part of why Christy and I fell in love with the house in the first place. It was private and peaceful, and we're kind of people that like keeping to ourselves. I still laugh when I think about all the times friends and family members have gotten lost trying to find our house. The yard wasn't huge, but I could clearly see the treehouse from our bedroom window, which was one of the deciding factors when I was determining where to build it. I wanted to be able to keep an eye on it should Luke hurt himself or something like that. I couldn't actually see inside of it because of the walls, but I had a perfect view of the steps leading up to it. From what I remember, everything was relatively normal for a pretty long time. Luke spent what I considered a normal amount of time playing in the treehouse. His older brother had kind of outgrown that phase, so Luke mostly played by himself in there. I can't remember exactly when, but at one point he started talking about an imaginary friend named Jake. We knew it was an imaginary friend because no one in the neighborhood had a child named Jake. It wasn't unusual for kids to have imaginary friends, but Luke was 8, not exactly the age where you'd still expect that sort of thing. Christy thought it was cute and innocent, but I was a little more skeptical. It seemed odd to me since Luke hadn't been the type of kid to make imaginary friends. Regardless, I didn't think much of it because he was only 8 years old. It started to get a little more concerning when Christy and I realized that Luke was starting to spend more and more time up there. What struck me as strange was that he wasn't bringing toys up there. As far as I could tell, he only had his imagination to play with. It's not like he had a game console or anything to keep him entertained, and I had been very clear about not carrying anything up there alone, as it was dangerous and I didn't want him to fall. At one point, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to ask him about it. Luke acted extremely weird when I asked him about his friend, and said that Jake was shy and didn't like being talked about. When I asked him why he was spending so much time up there, he told me that Jake only liked to play in the treehouse, and that he didn't like coming inside. I honestly didn't know what to say. It seemed like a pretty bizarre condition. Weren't imaginary friends supposed to be available wherever and whenever you needed them? I did some research later that day and found out that some kids only play with their imaginary friends in certain rooms of their house. So as weird as it was, I accepted it. Christy was pretty uneasy though. She thought Luke was taking this imaginary friend thing too far, and I honestly agreed. We weren't helicopter parents though. When it came to our kids, we let them spend their free time however they wanted to, as long as they were doing well in school and completing their chores. Most weekends, we'd let Luke play with the neighborhood kids until the sun went down. They'd ride bikes, play tag, and usual stuff. They were all good kids, and we trusted Luke to behave himself and stay out of trouble. He wasn't the type of kid to pick on other kids or get into fights, which was why I was especially concerned when Luke came home one Saturday with a black eye. I cleaned him up and asked him what happened. He looked down at the floor and didn't say anything, but I insisted that he tell me what happened and I wouldn't be mad at him. What he said next made me shiver. He looked up at me and told me that he had gotten into a fight with Jake. I had to process whose kid Jake was before realizing that he was talking about his imaginary friend. I told him not to lie to me and that he wasn't being funny. Instead of fessing up, Luke just started crying and ran to his room. Christy was convinced he'd gotten into a fight with one of the neighborhood kids and didn't want to admit it. I agreed with that. She wanted me to take down the treehouse right then and there, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. That treehouse had taken weeks of hard work, and the thought of tearing it down didn't sit right with me. I told her that I'd talk with Luke and tell him that he was taking things way too far. Luke refused to come out of his room or talk to me for the rest of the day, so getting something out of him wasn't going to happen. The next day, I decided to investigate. When I climbed up into the treehouse, what I saw made my stomach churn. Scattered around were children's socks and sneakers, all dirty and tattered. I knew for a fact that none of them belonged to Luke. I also knew for a fact that they weren't my older son's either. We had donated all of his old shoes a long time ago. That's not all that was up there. There were also food wrappers, bags, utensils, even a couple of dirty plates. Weirdest of all, there were pencil drawings of wild animals on all the walls. There was a fox, a bear, some deer. I don't remember all of them, but I do remember that they were all animals. The one that stood out to me the most was what appeared to be a gigantic spider with a face that was just completely penciled over. It was just downright freaky. I immediately climbed down and asked Luke about the treehouse. He told me that Jake only liked to talk on a full stomach, so he had to bring him food and other snacks. He then told me that the shoes and socks were also Jake's, and that Jake was pretty forgetful in general. That was it. From that moment on, I forbade Luke from going into the treehouse. I knew he was still lying to me, and I wanted to punish him until he admitted to it. I was 100% sure that Luke had found those things around the neighborhood and was making up stories to cover it up. Christy was worried about Luke's mental health, and I was too. We thought about consulting a professional should things continue. But one evening, I saw something that changed everything. I was looking out the bedroom window when I spotted movement near the treehouse. At first, I was livid that Luke was disobeying me, but then I realized what I was looking at. A sickly, frail-looking child was climbing down the treehouse steps. It wasn't Luke. He didn't look like any of the kids from the neighborhood either. His clothes were dirty, and he moved like he hadn't eaten in days. I ran outside, yelling for that kid to stop. As soon as I opened the back door, the boy darted into the woods. I chased after him, but he was freakishly fast. Within seconds, he disappeared into the trees. Christy called every parent in the neighborhood, but all their kids were accounted for. We called the police, who searched the woods thoroughly for over an hour but found nothing. No missing children had been reported in the area either. The whole thing was beyond explanation. With my consent, the police questioned my son about that kid, and what he told them was horrifying. Apparently, Jake claimed to be a magic boy who lived in the woods with his other friends. His friends were supposedly all animals, as he called them bear, fox, and names like that. Every time Jake would come to visit my son, he'd beg him to leave his family behind and join him in the woods with the rest of his friends. He'd then get mad when Luke would refuse and make these strange noises. I don't know why Luke never told me any of it, and there was a part of me that felt responsible for putting him in danger like that. The police conducted a full search of the woods but never found a thing. We never saw Jake again after that. Christy has always been incredibly superstitious and theorized that Jake wasn't real. I don't believe in stuff like that, but the way she talks about it always gives me an unsettling feeling. I honestly don't know which explanation is freakier, the fact that some paranormal entity was interacting with my son, or the thought that there might be woods folk lurking around somewhere in the forest behind my house. This happened a few weeks ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. I live in a quiet suburb in Delaware, but I'm a sophomore in college out in California. This happened during fall break in October, when I was back home for a few days. I come home every chance I can, which honestly always feels a little bittersweet. I love seeing my parents, but they're really traditional, which can be suffocating. One of the things that drives me crazy is how uptight they are about weed. Even though it's recently been legalized here, they'd lose their minds if they knew I smoked. They've never really gotten used to the idea that I'm an adult now. I can't really understand their position on the whole thing, but at the end of the day, they are my parents, and I would never disrespect them, especially while I'm under their roof. Whenever I'm home, I have to sneak around to avoid getting caught. I hate to admit it, but sneaking around my parents is a skill I've mastered over the years. I can't even count the number of times I've snuck out of the house late at night, let alone all the other mischievous shit I used to do. My dad has the nose of a bloodhound, so smoking inside isn't an option. Thankfully, my old tree house is still standing in the front yard. My parents built it for me when I was a kid, and even though it's weathered and creaky in some spots, it's held up surprisingly well. It's high enough in the trees that it's basically hidden from view, especially from the house. From up there, I can see everything. The yard, the street, some windows of the house, but no one can see me unless they know exactly where to look. When I was younger, that treehouse was the place I went when I needed to escape, which, if you knew what I was like as a child, was relatively often. It's honestly kind of hard to talk about with all the old memories flooding back, but I'll get to the point. On the Saturday before I was supposed to fly back to school, my parents were out at some banquet or something that was going to run late into the evening. I knew they wouldn't be home for hours, but I didn't know exactly when they'd be returning. I didn't want to risk getting caught in the backyard, so I climbed up into the treehouse with my stash just to be safe. It was chilly out, and I could see my own breath in the air. I have this theory that cold weather induces more nostalgia, but that might just be me. It was quiet and peaceful up there, and it was nice being the only one around. I've always liked being up high too, so that definitely added to the experience. I watched the sunset as I thought about school, excited to go back. By the time I finished, it was mostly dark outside, meaning I had timed things just right. That's when I noticed it. As I was panning my eyes across the yard, a light turned on in the house. I froze, knowing I was the only one home. My heart started racing as I stared at the window, feeling that instinctual sense of fear that only arises from true danger. My field of vision began closing in around that single source of light, as if it were drawing me in. A few moments later, movement in the backyard snapped me out of my disassociative state. 3 hooded figures were circling the property, clearly trying to move quickly. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. I watched as the 3 figures moved to the front steps. That's when a 4th figure opened the door and let them in. My chest tightened as it hit me. My house was being robbed. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't look away. Part of me was still frozen, and another part of me was still trying to convince myself that what I was seeing was real. That's the best way I can explain what I was feeling in that moment. One of the figures stayed outside, pacing the yard. I think some subconscious part of me clicked, because I looked down and my phone was in my hand, open to the keypad on my phone app. Without thinking, I dialed 911 and whispered into the phone, trying to stay as quiet as possible. I told the operator what was happening and hung up. But as I was putting my phone away, the light from the screen must have caught the guy's eye, because he whipped his head to look up into the trees. I ducked, but I was worried he had seen me. Not 3 seconds later, I got my answer. I heard a voice yell out, "Hey," clearly directed at me. I peeked around one of the wooden floor pieces and saw a dark figure walking towards the base of the tree. He knew where I was. I was sure of it. He got to the base of the tree and started climbing the wooden planks that led up to the treehouse. I screamed that police were on their way, hoping to scare him off, but he didn't stop. He just kept climbing, his hands gripping the planks like he was determined to get to me. Without thinking, I grabbed my bong, the only thing within reach, and threw it as hard as I could. It hit him in the head and shattered into a million pieces, and he let out a loud curse before falling to the ground. He wasn't very high up, but it was enough to make him reconsider. Instead of climbing back up again, he ran back towards the house and shouted at the other guys who were still inside. The next thing I saw was all 4 of them running to my backyard, where they presumably entered and exited from. My heart was still beating like crazy. Not even 3 minutes later, the police arrived. I was shaking so badly as I climbed down from the treehouse that I thought I was going to fall. I tried to tell them what had happened, but my words were a mess. I told them that I hadn't seen a getaway car and that I didn't get a good look at any of their faces. My parents pulled in not long after that. They were really sympathetic about the whole thing, which I was grateful for. The police told us that the robbers must have known my parents would be out that night. It seemed like a planned job, but what they didn't plan for was me being there. I still don't know how to feel about it. I especially don't want to think about what would have happened had that guy gotten all the way up to the treehouse. I'm back at school now, but if I'm being honest, I haven't had a good night's sleep since this incident. I'm terrified those people might come back, and even more terrified that my parents are there all alone. I'm worried sick about their safety, and I just hope that's the last we ever hear of them. I hope I never have to give an update, but I will if God forbid something comes up. When I was a kid, I had a very nightmarish experience at my childhood home. My family moved to this house when I was like 4, so I really don't remember anything of the house we lived in when I was born. We lived in what I call my childhood house from when I was 4 to when I was 14, so exactly 10 years. I loved that house. I have very good memories from growing up there. We moved out of state when I was just beginning high school, which was a nightmare in of itself, but that's nothing to do with this story. In the backyard of my childhood home was a treehouse. It was built by the previous owner for his kids. Believe it or not, when my parents viewed the house, a major selling point was the kid-friendly nature of the house and the backyard for my older brother and I. My brother Kyle is 2 years older than me, so he was 6 when they bought the house. And my brother and I apparently were very excited over the treehouse aspect in the backyard, according to my parents. My brother and I would play in the treehouse with friends we'd made over the years. But as the years passed, I would stop playing in the treehouse like that at a certain age. By the age of 12, I was obviously not playing in the treehouse anymore, but I was admittedly a troublemaker around this age, and I would often get in trouble with my parents. I'd get grounded often, and in general I'd just throw a lot of temper tantrums and there would be a lot of yelling in the house. One weekend, my dad grounded me for a repeat complaint from my guidance counselor about my behavior and grades in school, and like an angsty, annoying preteen, I thought I hated my parents at that moment. That night, I refused to sleep in the house. I took a couple blankets and pillows and went outside to the treehouse to sleep up there. It wasn't the first time I'd done this, and my parents would know about it when I'd do it. They didn't care. It was my little way of rebelling. Little did my dad know that I had my Nintendo DS with me, even though I wasn't allowed to play video games or watch TV. I played Animal Crossing for literally hours before getting tired and eventually going to sleep, but I think I was only asleep for a few moments. I don't think I even entered REM sleep yet when I woke up to a voice from outside calling my name. Tommy. Tommy. I was still confused as I was waking back up. It could have been my dad's voice. Tommy, are you up there? The voice said. All I remember is it being a deep, grown man's voice. I didn't reply. My heart started to race for some reason. I heard the steps of the ladder squeaking as someone was coming up. And then, in the near pitch black darkness, I saw someone poke their head through the opening in the floor. I couldn't see their face. I just saw the shadow of the outline of their head. He said, "Ah, there you are." I replied, "Dad?" But this was where he stopped responding entirely. For about 20 seconds, I stared at this head that I presume was staring back at me. I was waiting for my eyes to readjust to the darkness, but something told me that that wasn't my dad. I stood up and went to the window of the treehouse and started screaming "Dad" as loud as I could. I saw the light in my parents' room turn on, and I also heard footsteps hurrying down the ladder to the treehouse. Moments later, my parents burst outside through the back door, and my dad swore to me that he wasn't out there playing a prank on me. My parents believed me. It wasn't like some stupid horror movie where the parents don't believe a word the kid says. My uncle was still an active cop at the time, and so my dad called him for advice, and my uncle made a report on the incident the next day. Not much information I could give besides I heard a deep man's voice and saw the outline of his head, and that he knew my name. Not much the police could work with. Obviously, I never spent a night in the treehouse again. My dad for a while thought it was one of the neighbors directly across from us, but he could never prove it. For years, whenever I'd see him outside and he'd say hi to me, I'd try to think back to the voice from that night, but I just couldn't remember it clearly enough to make a comparison. It still remains a very unsettling mystery in the back of my mind. I was taking a road trip in my Mustang from Texas to Arizona to visit my brothers. I usually keep emergency supplies in the trunk, such as water and tools. I was taking, I guess, what you would call a scenic back route, because I liked flying at high speeds with the top down without worry of other cars or police. This was one of those completely deserted seeming roads with one lane on either side and nothing but desert sand, cacti, and shrubs as far as the eye can see. I was flying down this road when the car started to emit these concerning popping noises from under the hood, and the car started to jolt or jump slightly. I put a heavy foot on the brakes to bring the car from a speeding 90 miles per hour to a less than gradual halt. I got out from the car, popping the hood, pretending as if I'd even know what to expect or how I'd go about fixing it. There was no smoke, nothing like that, but I didn't have a clue what could be the problem. I got back in my car to try and start it, and as I feared, the damn thing wouldn't even start back up now. The car was an '01 Ford Mustang, so yeah, it was an old car with its share of problems. Naturally, I tried to call my roadside service company, but bad became worse, realizing I didn't have any service this far out in the desert. I was more or less stranded. I hadn't seen a single other car pass me that whole hour I was driving on that road, and I was scared to think how long it would take for someone to pass. I waited on the side of the road, sitting on my car's trunk for literally hours, sweating my ass off. My spirits rose when I saw the shine of a car reflecting the sunlight speeding down the road in the horizon. I hopped off my trunk and started walking and waving my arms out for help, but the car didn't stop. It zoomed past me. Pure evil. I didn't know how somebody could leave another human being stranded like that. Nightfall came and the hunger was setting in. No cars had passed since the first, and I was trying to fill my stomach with the water bottles I had in my trunk. Eventually, I saw headlights approaching. I had my car's hazards on, but I also waved my arms once more. The truck pulled to the side, and a fairly large man stepped out. I told him my car broke down and asked if he knew anything about cars, but he didn't immediately seem interested in my car. He more so seemed interested in asking me if I was alone, where I was going, and why I didn't just call for help. Then he asked me if anyone knew I was here. These questions were certainly making me uncomfortable. He finally offered me a ride, though if he was trying to make a point of making me uncomfortable, he accomplished that. I stepped up into his pickup truck, and off we started driving. He said it would be a long while before either of us would have phone service. He started asking me more questions, like why I would decide to take a back route like this. Minutes in, the truck started to slow down, and I heard him mutter, "Ah, shit." He pulled onto the sand on the side of the road, looked at me, and said the piece of crap broke down. This couldn't be happening. I looked back at the man and realized he was still looking at me. Like 5 seconds went by and he was just still staring at me. He finally asked me to go lift up the hood once he would crank the latch. I can only describe this whole situation so well, but through everything up until this point, I was insanely suspicious. I went in front of his truck with a bit of distance between the front and I, and waited to hear a click, meaning the truck's hood was unlatched. In my head, I was picturing him trying to run me over, and that's exactly what happened. As I took one step towards the truck to try and open the hood, I heard the roar of the engine as the man was on the gas. I dove for my life. If I reacted half a second later, I'd have lost my legs or instantly been killed. I took off running into the pitch black night, looking back to see the taillights still there. And then this. Gunshots. Surely gunshots aimed at me. That man was trying to kill me. It was too dark out there for him to possibly shoot me dead without some kind of luck, but I thought I was going to die at any moment. I ran as far as I could, then dove and made myself as low to the ground as possible. I heard a truck speeding off in the distance, so I turned and saw the taillights of the truck slowly disappearing down the empty road. I eventually fell asleep on the side of the road, and the nightmare didn't end until early morning, when I woke up to another pickup truck passing by. I waved them down, covered in dirt and sand, and thank God this man was actually normal, he and his wife. They gave me water and drove me to the nearest town, where I was able to call the towing company. It was a 45-minute drive back to my car on that goddamned road, then that same distance back to bring it into a shop. Long story short, this was the worst trip and experience of my life. Having someone try to run you over and then shoot at you isn't something you simply get over. There were these woods by my parents' house that I would like to walk through a lot. I found this one very small circular clearing in the woods. It sat by a small, calming stream of water, and it had a big rock in the center that I'd like to sit on and read my books. I guess you could say I was a loner child. One day, like any other, I walked to the circle, sat on the rock, opened my book to the bookmark, and resumed my novel. It wasn't exactly midday. It was approaching the end of the day, so it was getting slightly darker in the woods. I was interrupted by footsteps behind me. I set down my book and went into the trees to see if there was a deer or other animal nearby. Black bears are what always worried me as a kid. I heard more footsteps, so I followed quietly in that direction. Whatever it was moving fast. Faster than I possibly could while trying to remain quiet. The footsteps disappeared. I figured the animal got too far away, but as long as it wasn't interested in bothering me, I didn't care what it was. I started walking back to my circle, but as soon as I got a view of it between the trees, my heart dropped to my stomach. There was someone sitting on my rock, back to me, but I could tell they were holding my book. I didn't know whether to approach or not until the man said out loud, "I don't like this book," and turned to me, as if he knew exactly where I was standing, even still behind a few trees. He said, "I watch you come here a lot." He had on this weird smile that immediately made me even more uncomfortable. My 13-year-old self didn't have a fight or flight response system. I only had a flight response instinct. The man stood up and took 1 or 2 steps towards me, and I started running. I knew the way back to my house easily. I was there after a couple minutes of running. That night, I got a knock at my window. I woke up terrified and screamed for my dad. My dad came rushing in, and when I told him, he went outside to check. I was horrified when he came rushing in, and when I told him, he went outside to check. I was outright disturbed when he came back in with my book that I left in the woods. He said it was left outside my window. I slept in my parents' room for like a week after that, and needless to say, I never returned to that circle in the woods. I had taken a job working for a company based in the mountains. They offered me a cottage to stay in while working there. It was an old home built into the side of a mountain and surrounded by the forest. I lived in the basement, which had been converted into a small living space with a bathroom, kitchen, sleeping area, and a laundry room. The laundry room was L-shaped and had a door that went out back and into the surrounding forest. The door that led to the forest was locked from the inside and was quite difficult to open. I never used that door and always kept it locked. The rest of the house was empty, but I didn't have access to it. After a day of work, I returned to my little basement for an evening reading and playing solitaire. I turned off my lamp and started to nod off when I heard a noise. The noise was like wood creaking. I played it off as my imagination, but then it repeated. I thought maybe one of the cabinets in the kitchen was latched improperly and swung open. I checked, but all the cabinets were secured. I opened my closet, thinking maybe something in there had made the sound. But again, nothing. The last place to look was the laundry room. I opened the door that connected the house to the laundry room and was instantly hit by a gust of cold night air. I slowly turned the corner and witnessed the door that led to the outside just swaying in the nighttime breeze. I am 100% certain I had this door closed, and like I said earlier, there is no way it could open on its own. I don't know what happened. Was there someone waiting in the laundry room, just waiting for me to fall asleep before sneaking out? Was it something supernatural? Either way, there are few times I had ever felt such genuine horror. Tennessee has some real characters out in nature. I hiked all around while in school there. Made some good memories with a girl in the enveloping nature. Tennessee has good roads to popular hiking sites and tons of mini trails branching off. Sometimes you need to know what to look for as far as trail markers go, because the interesting ones are always a good ways out. There's one spring waterfall that spills across a mossy granite wall, towering over a shallow stream that empties into a decent-sized pond. I went out there with a friend last time, and we got separated on the way out. I have no freaking clue how that happened. We've each been hiking for over 10 years. I've run over it 1,000 times in my mind, and it has to be this one ledge system. To get to the top of the fall, you need to take a longish detour that has an old wooden railing and a 3-way branching ledge system. So I've taken all 3 routes and ended up at the same spot. They take maybe 3 to 4 minutes to blast through, and they're kind of like rocky corridors. I don't take the left one anymore, because I'm 90% sure these big stains in the middle are blood. Don't want to know what happened there. It's odd because the left is by far the most inviting. Flowers bloom from vines that are etched into the moss-matted bedrock. Anyways, I'm 45 seconds ahead of her and opt for the right path when I realize I should tell her to avoid the left. It's really hard to reverse given the sloping angle of the path and a few short drops that become narrow climbs. Screw it. Faster if I speed through and yell down. I get out of the right corridor and swing around to where the middle path drops off. I yell, but no reply. So she took left. I run over and climb into the left corridor, thinking she saw the stains and freaked out. To be fair, it looks like someone got bludgeoned to death. I ran up the corridor, but she was gone. I called her name, nothing. And that's what made my hair stand up. I literally heard nothing. No birds, no hum of the forest, not even wind. Just myself and the babbling water. I traced left all the way back, and noted a few side passages if you miss a couple of the jumps. No bodies were in there or the middle, though. Good. I figure I may as well get to the top of the falls where I can get somewhat of an aerial view. I get there, and Ashley's sitting there waiting for me. She says she took the left path with the trail guide. What? There are no trail guides. There are rangers, but she knows the difference. They would not be in the rock labyrinth. This guy had a uniform and a trail authority visor on. She knew what I was thinking based on my face, and agreed that we should reverse course ASAP without us saying anything out loud. It's weird when you know you're being watched. We pretended we were going back to the car real quick to get more water, and so I left some fish food in a little crevice like I always did, and we left. She showed me this weird side passage that could not have existed a year before. I walked all the way around. You had to crouch, but you could walk through the labyrinth if you kept left, though. Hindsight, we shouldn't have taken another way. I think he lives in those tunnels. Ashley said he kept trying to lead her in a different direction, but she just followed the light and saw him standing in the tunnel as she walked the rest of the trip to the top. That means he was in there while I was looking for her. And that means she followed him before seeing the blood splatters all over the floors and walls. And that's not the totally fucked up part. The fish food that I left in the crevice was on the hood of my car. Her water bottle was gone too. She had a carabiner to her pack, so he must have snuck up and taken it at some point. That's strange because we're fast hikers. We never went back there and never will. was living alone in a small rental house just outside town when this happened. It was a one-story place at the end of a short dead-end road. There were only 5 houses on the street, and at night, it was usually quiet. I worked from home doing freelance graphic design, so most days I didn't leave unless I had to get groceries. I didn't get visitors often. My friends usually texted before coming over. That's why the first knock stood out. It was around 8:45 at night on a Thursday. I was in the living room watching TV when I heard 4 firm knocks on the front door. I muted the TV and waited, thinking maybe I imagined it. Then there were 2 more knocks. I got up and walked to the door. There's a small peephole in the center of it. When I looked through, I saw a man standing on my porch holding a medium-sized cardboard box. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He looked normal, maybe mid-30s. I opened the door but kept the chain on. He immediately said that he had a delivery that required a signature. He read a name off a small handheld device. It wasn't my name. It wasn't even close. I told him he had the wrong address. He looked down at the box, then at the device, then back at me. He read the address out loud. It was my exact address. I told him no one by that name lived here. He stared at me for a second longer than necessary. Then he said he must have been given the wrong information and would take it back to the truck. I watched him walk back down my driveway. I expected to see a delivery van or at least a car parked somewhere nearby, but there was nothing. He walked past my mailbox and turned the corner at the end of the street. I didn't see where he went. I shut the door and locked it. I told myself it was just a small company delivery or maybe a contractor driver without a marked vehicle. The next night, at almost the exact same time, there were 3 knocks again. This time I didn't open the door right away. I went to the peephole first. It was the same man with the same jacket and box. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through it and told him he already came by and that no one with that name lived here. He didn't answer right away. Then he said he just needed a signature and that the system showed the package had to be delivered tonight. I told him I wasn't signing for someone I didn't know. There was a long pause. Then he said okay and stepped back from the door. I stayed at the peephole. Instead of walking away right away, he stood at the edge of the porch looking at the house. He slowly turned his head toward my front windows, then toward the side of the house, then back at the door. After about 15 seconds, he finally walked down the driveway. Again, I saw no vehicle. That's when it started to feel wrong. On the 3rd night, there was no knock. I actually felt relieved. I thought maybe he figured out the mistake. I even joked to myself about how weird it would have been if he showed up again. On the 4th night, I was in the kitchen washing dishes around 9 p.m. when I heard 4 knocks. It wasn't on the front door. It was on the side of the house near the dining room window. I slowly walked into the dining room and looked toward the window, but no one was there. Then there were 4 more knocks at the front door. I went to the peephole, and it was him again. But this time he wasn't holding a box. His hands were empty. I didn't say anything, and he knocked again. Then he stepped back and looked directly at the peephole. I stepped away from the door so he couldn't see movement, and I didn't make a sound. After about 30 seconds, he turned and walked away. I waited 5 full minutes before checking the windows. I walked around the house with the lights off and looked through the blinds. I saw him standing across the street near the tree line. He was just standing there facing my house. After maybe a minute, he walked off into the darkness. I relocked every window and door again, even though they were already locked. The next day, I called the local police non-emergency line and explained what had been happening. The officer I spoke to said it sounded like someone trying to verify occupancy. He said sometimes burglars will knock to see if someone answers before trying to break in later. He told me to install cameras if I could and to call 911 if the man came back. That night, I left all the lights off in the front of the house and stayed in my bedroom. Around 8:45, right on time, there were 4 knocks. I didn't respond at all. After a few seconds, 4 more. Then silence. I waited about a minute. Then I heard something else. A soft thud against the back of my house, and then another. I realized it sounded like someone testing the back door. I grabbed my phone and quietly walked into the hallway. I could hear the back doorknob turning slowly, and then stopping, and then turning again. I called 911 like I was instructed and whispered that someone was trying to get into my house. While I was on the phone, the knocking started again at the front door. The dispatcher told me officers were on the way. The back doorknob kept turning. There was more than one person. Then I heard the sound of something metal scraping lightly against the doorframe. After about 30 seconds, everything stopped. Even as it was totally silent though, I stayed on the phone until the police arrived. When they searched the outside of the house, they found fresh pry marks on the back door near the handle. The officer told me if I hadn't been home, the door likely would have been forced open. They drove around but didn't find anyone suspicious. The next night, I stayed at my brother's apartment across town. I didn't tell anyone on social media or anything that I wasn't home. I just left. Around 9 p.m., my phone rang. It was my neighbor from 2 houses down. She said there was someone standing on my porch knocking repeatedly. She said he had been there for at least 5 minutes. She asked if I was home. I told her no and asked if he had a vehicle. She said she didn't see one. I told her to call the police. Officers arrived and questioned him. Later that night, an officer called me and said the man claimed he was trying to deliver a package, but he misplaced it. He had no company ID and no marked vehicle. They warned him to stay away from the property. 2 days later, police arrested him in a nearby neighborhood after he was caught attempting to break into a house where the owner was out of town. In his car, they found multiple empty cardboard boxes and a small handheld scanner that wasn't connected to any real delivery company. During questioning, he admitted he would knock with a fake package first. If someone answered, he would leave and mark the house as occupied. If no one answered after multiple attempts, he would come back later and force entry. He told detectives that sometimes he would knock several nights in a row to see if the pattern changed. If lights were on one night and off the next, he assumed the house was empty. Hearing that made me realize how close I was to not being home that first week. If I had ignored the door on one of those early nights, he probably would have come back later expecting no one inside. I moved out of that house 3 months later when my lease ended. I still don't answer the door at night unless I know exactly who's coming over. If someone knocks unexpectedly, I stay quiet and check cameras first. And if anyone ever shows up with a package that has my address but not my name, I don't even go near the door anymore. This story starts in the lead up to Christmas. To set the scene, I live near Glasgow in Scotland. I stay with my parents, siblings, cats, and dogs. We're a close-knit family and often spend nights together in the living room watching TV, playing games, and catching up on our lives. At the time of this story, I was 16 turning 17. I was in high school, but getting closer to leaving and starting my education outside of it. In the days leading up to Christmas, during one of those late nights together, we were watching A Christmas Carol. We often have movie nights around Christmas, and it's one of my favorite things about that time of year. During the movie, we heard a knock at the door. This wasn't unusual, so we didn't think much of it. My mom got up to answer it, but nobody was there. The street was empty. Our garden wraps from the front of the house around to the back, so she checked along the side of the house too, but there was nobody there either. She came back inside, and we resumed the movie. A few days later, I was sitting at the living room table doing exam work when I heard another knock. I paused my work and went to answer the door, but again, nobody was there. We assumed it was probably neighborhood kids playing a prank. Where I'm from, kids sometimes get bored and cause trouble instead of finding something better to do. In Scotland, there's a game called Chappie, where kids knock on someone's door and run away laughing. It's stupid, but as a kid, the adrenaline rush of someone opening the door to nobody there can be weirdly fun. We have a family group chat where we keep each other updated on things, and throughout that week, several family members mentioned experiencing the same thing. The one that stood out the most was something my dad experienced. At the time, my dad usually stayed up later than everyone else, either playing Xbox or watching shows once the house was quiet. One night around 11:30, when the street was silent and all the kids would have been inside, he heard a very quiet knock. He was confused because of the time. He checked through the peephole before opening the door, but he saw nobody. He slowly unlocked and opened the door to look outside. Again, nobody was there, just a quiet, empty street. He locked the door and came upstairs to ask if anyone had heard it, but because the knock was so quiet, nobody else had. This started to unsettle us because it had been happening repeatedly. Nobody had ever seen or heard anyone outside except for the knocking itself. Usually when kids do this, you hear them laughing or running away. This felt different. Christmas Day is when everything escalated. We spent the day with family, opening presents, sharing gifts, watching movies, playing games, and eating way too much food. It was a great day. Later that night, I felt sick from eating so much, which I always do Christmas, so I went upstairs to lie down. I ended up dozing off and woke up hours later. When I checked my phone, it said 2:01 a.m. Everyone else was in bed and the house was completely silent. I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep because once I woke up, it's hard for me to sleep again no matter what time it is. I stayed on my phone in the dark scrolling social media instead of turning the TV on, watching Christmas present haul videos and messaging friends who are still awake. It's normal during Christmas break when there's no school or responsibilities and you try to enjoy the freedom before going back to exams and routines. After a while, I heard a faint knock. I wasn't sure if it came from my door, my window, or if I imagined it. I sat up straight in bed, staring into the dark room with my heart racing. I didn't want to move. I knew nobody should be outside at that time on Christmas night. I didn't know if the past few weeks were just getting into my head, or if someone was actually inside the house. My room is on the second floor, so someone being at my window would be very unlikely. After what felt like forever, I finally worked up the courage to open my bedroom door. As I did, I heard what sounded like footsteps coming up the stairs. My brain immediately assumed it was my dad coming up to bed after staying up late like he usually did. I stepped into view of the staircase to tell him I was still awake and heard the knocking again. That's when I realized it wasn't my dad. It was a man I'd never seen before. I immediately felt sick when I saw him. I wondered if this was the person behind all the knocking. He was already inside the house. He was staggering as he climbed the stairs and looked heavily intoxicated. I slowly backed into my room, luckily without him seeing me, and I quietly shut my door. I could hear him walking around and opening doors, going into each room one by one. I remember thinking it was only a matter of time before he reached mine. I completely froze and didn't know what to do. It felt like all my common sense disappeared. Eventually, I opened my door slightly and saw him coming out of my younger sister's room. That's when my brain finally kicked back into action. I ran to my parents' room and woke them up, telling them there was a man inside the house. My mom woke up instantly while my dad was still groggy. We went downstairs together and found the man passed out on the couch with my dad's beers opened and scattered around him. My mom shouted at him to get out. He woke slightly and angrily insisted the house belonged to him. We tried to get him up, but he was completely dead weight. My mom slapped him trying to wake him, but he barely reacted. A few minutes later, my dad came fully downstairs, saw what was happening, and immediately took control of the situation. He shouted at the man that this was not his house and threatened him to leave. The man refused. My dad eventually had to physically lift him off the couch and drag him out the side door. He forced him outside and warned him not to come back before shutting the door. We thought it was finally over, but seconds later, glass suddenly shattered toward us. The man had punched through the window, sending broken glass inside. He pushed his face inside the broken glass like something out of The Shining while my dad went to call the police. The man started shouting aggressive threats, saying he now owned the house, that he knew what we looked like, and that he would return. Needless to say, we were all in shock. It was hard to believe someone would do something like this on Christmas night. Eventually he left and the police arrived. They took statements from all of us. Mine was the longest since I had seen him first. Not long after, the police left. Luckily, because it was the winter, it had snowed that night, which is actually rare where we live since we usually just get slush. There was a clear trail of blood leading down the street. Police followed it to a nearby playground where they found the man lying on the ground with blood and glass in his hands. They arrested him after, and later confirmed they believed he was the intruder. Our window was replaced the next morning. We told my siblings what had happened. Surprisingly, they slept through the whole thing, probably knocked out from all the Christmas food. Later, I got a restraining order against the man because of my age and the threats he made. He was fined for the damage and given community service instead of jail time. When police questioned him about the weeks of knocking at our door before the incident, he claimed he knew nothing about that and denied ever doing it. It turned out, he actually lived in our house years before we moved in. He claimed there was no bad intention and said he had simply drank too much while out with friends and accidentally went into the wrong house. Thankfully, nobody in our family was seriously hurt. The only injury was my mom bruising her wrist from slapping him while wearing bracelets. Apparently that hurts you more than the person you hit. To this day, we still have no explanation for the knocking that happened before that night. Even now, sometimes I feel like I hear a knock late at night. Maybe it's just in my head, or maybe it isn't. I guess I'll never know if it was him or someone else out there watching. This happened around 2010 when I was about 6 years old. My family and I were living in a small neighborhood in Springfield, Oregon. It was my older brother, sister, my mom, and I, as my dad was deployed at the time. I was really close with my dad and always took it hard when he was away. Late one night, I sat on the porch with my mom while she smoked a cigarette and we watched the rain. While we were sitting there, cold but enjoying the rain and each other's company, we noticed a man walking in the middle of the road. He was wearing one of those oversized yellow rain jackets. It immediately caught both of our attention because it was pouring rain really late and there was no one else usually out at that hour. We sat there watching him as he began walking slightly toward our driveway. My mom stood up, grabbed my hand, put her cigarette out, and we watched as the man stopped walking right next to our garbage cans in our driveway. My mom turned to take us inside, and the man began yelling at us. I don't remember what he said, but I remember being so terrified as my mom rushed me inside. As soon as we got inside, my mom locked the door and turned off all the lights. At that point, I was terrified, and of course, being a kid, I started crying. My mom rushed my siblings and I, shushing us, and we all went and laid in my parents' king-size bed together as we were all a bit worried. But nothing else happened. There was no more yelling or noise or anything, so we all drifted to sleep. That night, I had a terrible nightmare I can still picture to this day. It was of a man in a big yellow rain jacket peering through our window. I woke up terrified and crying, literally shaking my sister awake just so I could tell her I was scared. I have no idea how much time passed. My sister got out of bed and walked me to the bathroom that was attached to the bedroom. She shut the door and spoke with me while I cried, trying not to wake my mom or brother. But while we were in there, we suddenly heard banging. Loud banging on the front door. My sister burst out of the bathroom and started shaking my mom awake without saying anything, and naturally my brother woke up from the sound too. I sat terrified in the bathroom while my mom motioned for my siblings to join me in there. We watched her walk out of the room toward the front door. My siblings and I were all crying, scared out of our minds, as this man was still repeatedly banging on the door. My mom must have been trying to find her old BlackBerry phone, but seemingly failed, because when she came back, she didn't have it. That meant none of us could call the police since this was the only phone in the house. We sat there in silence listening to the man, who was now screaming and yelling for us to let him in while still banging loudly on the door. It was honestly a really hopeless and fearful night. It was just the 5 of us with no phone to call the police, and my dad, who is normally our protector, was gone. We sat there on the floor huddled together, freaking out and praying our neighbors would call the police, but nothing happened. Eventually the man left, but no police ever came. What was strange is that it was a small neighborhood where everyone lived close together, and our house specifically was a duplex, so how not a single neighbor heard this and called the police is beyond me. Eventually, we went to sleep, and everything was okay for a while, but not even a few weeks later, still just the 5 of us at my home, my family woke up to my front door wide open, along with a window open and a huge hole cut into the window screen. My mom immediately called the police. There were lots of random items missing, including my piggy bank filled with all my holiday savings, along with random items around the house. But the most disturbing thing missing was a giant vase filled with cash and coins that my family had been saving for months. The sickening part was that it had been on my nightstand right next to my bed where we were all sleeping. This was a long time ago, and sadly my mom has since passed, and my dad wasn't there when it happened, so I'm not really sure what other details I might have missed. I do know that the intruder was never caught. I also don't know if the same man who was harassing us that night was the same person who broke into our house weeks later. It could be connected or it could not be. I do know that none of us were harmed, which makes me feel like maybe it wasn't the same person, because that man seemed really aggressive for someone who just wanted money. But on the other hand, I later found what looked like the same giant vase sitting on the porch of a neighbor who was a man that lived alone and that we never really saw. So honestly, who knows? This happened to me almost 3 years ago, almost to the day, while I was in Idaho serving a full-time mission. The town that me and my companion, who I'll refer to as Spencer, were assigned to was quite small, so there wasn't always a lot for us to do, and on top of this, at the time, I was going through a rough patch. Things like self-esteem issues and having trouble sleeping, so as a result, we found it difficult to stay out all day doing work. One other thing about where we were assigned was that we were living in an actual house, albeit a tiny one. Usually we only ever get apartments, but I guess for this area, a house was the only option, probably because there were no apartments anywhere nearby. The layout of the house was fairly simple. As you walked through the front door, you entered the main room where our desks were, and immediately to your right was our bedroom. If you kept walking straight, you would walk through a large open doorway that led right into the kitchen. From there, to your right was the bathroom, and to your left was the laundry room. And that was it, besides one storage closet in the kitchen as well. One other detail was that although the house technically stood on its own lot, the landlord's house was right next door, and anytime we had problems with something, we could just walk over or call him. On this particular night, I was sitting in the living room at my desk on my phone with my chair turned to face the kitchen, and Spencer was sitting in the bedroom on his phone. It had gotten dark outside a couple of hours earlier, so we returned home and were just relaxing before we went to bed. In the middle of whatever I was doing, I heard a single knock come from the window above the sink. And because of the layout of the house, where this window was, you could basically see the whole living area where I was sitting. I looked up at the window for a few seconds, but only saw darkness. I went back to what I was doing and began to think that it must have just been a branch or something. There were large trees behind the house, but the more I thought about it, the more unlikely it seemed. None of the trees were close enough to the house to brush the window that way, and it wouldn't have made a knock sound like the one I heard. In the middle of having this thought, I heard another knock around the corner at the window in the laundry room. The full weight of what was happening was finally coming into focus, but my mind was still looking for an explanation that didn't conclude that someone was outside circling the house, stalking my companion and I. I started to tell Spencer what I had heard from the living room, but as I was, another knock came from the window in the living room, the one right next to me. I didn't see who it was on the other side, and I didn't want to. I jumped up and ran into the bedroom and locked the door. I asked Spencer if he heard it too, and he said yes. We started debating what to do. All we had for weapons were a couple of knives, and we didn't know how many people were actually out there, or if they were armed, so going to confront them on our own was out of the question. During our discussion, the knocking sound moved from the window in the living room to the front door itself, and we were getting more and more freaked out. We briefly debated calling the police, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and it would take them forever to get out there to help us. Then Spencer remembered we had the landlord's number. He called him and began explaining the situation, and by this point, we hadn't heard a knock at the door for a couple of minutes or so, but I knew what that meant, and I was dreading it when it finally came. A knock at our bedroom window. The blinds were closed, so we couldn't see who it was, and they couldn't see us, but that didn't make me feel much better. Spencer told him someone was stalking the house, and he said he would be right out with a shotgun. We waited for another few minutes, anticipating another knock, but nothing happened until finally our landlord came to the door and announced himself. We asked him if he had seen anyone, and he said no, but that he saw a pickup truck speeding away as he approached the house. I asked if he had gotten a license plate or any other features that could help the police, but he said they had already been too far away for him to see anything. Spencer and I grabbed our flashlights and circled the house with him. There were small patches of snow on the ground from a weather system that had come through a few days earlier, and in the snow, we saw footprints indeed circling the house, and as far as we could tell, there was only one set. We debated calling the police, but we knew that they wouldn't be much help in tracking the guy down. The landlord said to call him again if the guy came back, and with that, we went back into the house, locked everything down, and tried to sleep, but we couldn't. The first thing that came to mind was other missionaries playing a prank on us. But if that was the case, then why didn't they reveal themselves or say gotcha or something like that at some point? Also, it was past curfew. Everyone was supposed to be home, and the closest missionaries to us were at least 20 minutes away. The other possibility was that it was some teenagers from the ward playing a prank, but that didn't seem likely either, especially afterwards, because again, they would have come back and started laughing at us, and there was only one set of footprints we found. If it was a prank, I feel like that would have been a group thing to do. After the fact, no one ever fessed up when we did some asking around, so to this day, we still have no idea who was outside or why they chose to harass us. But the scariest thing to me wasn't the knocking or how the only thing separating us from him was a thin layer of glass, but the fact that I likely looked right at this guy when he first knocked on the window in the kitchen and didn't even know it. From that day forward, my sleep only got worse, nothing worked, and my own personal issues did not improve either. I'm not sure I'll ever go back to that house. It was a Friday or a Saturday night. I was pre-gaming with some friends at my apartment before going out to a bar in town. One of my friends called the Uber, and we were all pretty drunk, laughing and being loud with typical drunken banter. We got to the bar, and no line that night, surprisingly. At some point in the night, I asked for a girl's number who I'd been talking to. When I went into my pocket to get my phone, I realized I didn't have it on me. I checked all my pockets and confirmed this. I tried retracing my steps in the bar and asked each bartender if someone turned in a phone. I didn't remember even using my phone the whole time I'd been out though. I stepped outside the bar with one of my friends to use his phone to call mine. Someone picked up on the other end. I heard the fiddling of the phone, but they didn't say anything. I said, "Hi, where'd you find this phone?" Just breathing on the other end. I asked them if they were at the bar, but they hung up on me. I looked at my friend and tried calling again. Went straight to voicemail though. I tried using Find My iPhone, but apparently I had that feature switched off for some reason. This was a pretty sobering experience. There was no way I could have fun knowing my phone was stolen. My friends told me just worry about it tomorrow, go to the police station and get their help in tracking it. I went home early that night. I put a couple slices of bread in the toaster before bed, and found my phone on the kitchen counter. It didn't make sense. I signed into it and checked my recent calls, and indeed, someone accepted the call and it lasted for 25 seconds. Someone had been in my apartment to accept the call, that much was clear. I flipped the place upside down looking, screaming for whoever it was to come out from where they were hiding. Of course, this had a lot to do with the liquid confidence from drinking so much that night. I finally called the cops, but considering there was no real proof of any forced entry, and places to hide are basically non-existent in this apartment, they couldn't do anything besides a police report. Nothing seemed to be missing from my apartment, but going to sleep that night, knowing someone had been in my apartment, or even worse, might possibly have still been in there with me, was probably the most uncomfortable night of my life. I was 17 years old, and this happened on a late summer night. My dad and little brother had gone to a Boy Scout campout. My dad was one of the Scoutmasters. I was home alone with my mom for the weekend. She was already in bed at this point. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was just finishing up my late night gaming. I had to go to the bathroom one more time before going to sleep though. While sitting on the toilet playing games on my phone, I heard the faintest little tap on the bathroom door. "Mom, was that you?" "Mom," I yelled. It wasn't windy or anything. There didn't seem to be any logical way to dismiss it. I slowly and nervously opened the door, but there was nobody there. However, my bedroom door was now shut. I was certain I hadn't shut it. I went over to my mom's room and told her that I thought somebody was in my room. She didn't take me seriously and told me that she didn't know what to tell me. I tried to convince myself that maybe I did shut my door. I opened my door feeling extremely freaked out, and when I snuck a peek into the room, I felt like my heart exploded inside of my chest. I could see a hand sticking out from behind the dresser in the corner of my room. Somebody was hiding there. I ran to my mom's room and locked the door behind me. After quietly freaking out, telling her there's a man in the house, she finally believed me and went straight to my phone to call the cops. I put my ear up against the door to try and hear anything going on outside. I eventually heard the man's footsteps come out from my room and slowly come closer to my mom's room until making it right outside the door, then stopping. I could see the outlines of his shoes through the bottom crack of the door. He tried the doorknob, but thankfully it had a lock. It seemed the lock was enough to persuade him to give up, because I heard him stomp down the stairs and out the front door. I hurried to the window to see which way the man was heading, but he was already gone. When I was younger, 10 years old at the time, my mom had just started letting me stay home alone. We had been watching my mom's friend's dog while they were on vacation. My mom worked weeknights, so she told me that they would come around back since the dog's cage was right next to the back door, and that I would have to let them in. I sat in the den by the back door, with the dog by my side while I watched TV. He then started to growl and bark, while looking out the window to the dark. I tried to see what he was barking at, but it was too dark. Of course, I assumed it was my mom's friend coming to pick up the dog. I went over to the door with the dog following me and turned on the patio light. I couldn't see anyone out there at first, but the dog was still barking. I made sure to peek at every corner of the yard, but then I saw someone at the garden by our shed. It looked like my mom's friend. They seemed to be bending over, picking something up. I assumed she was admiring my mom's garden or something logical. I then received a disturbing phone call. I prioritized answering the phone, as my mom was strict about me always answering the phone when I was home alone. I left the dog to continue barking by the door as I picked up the phone, hoping it was my mom. And it was. She told me that her friend wasn't going to pick up the dog that night, as they wouldn't be getting home until past midnight. I began to stutter, as the pure horror prohibited me from speaking coherently. I managed to finally blurt out that someone was in our yard, and my mom started screaming like a lunatic. She told me to get up to my room, lock the door, and hide under the bed while my mom called the cops. I obeyed and laid there in silence for a good 10 minutes, until I got a knock at the door. I sprang up and out of the room, making it halfway down the stairs, when I saw a face looking in through the window of our front door. This face, a guy, staring right at me. A face so unsettling that it disturbs me thinking of it today. I screamed at the guy that the police were on their way, but he didn't move. He insisted on just staring at me like a statue. I ran all the way back upstairs, tripping twice, and back to my room. I waited another few minutes before another knock came at the door, followed by a muffled shouting noise. It was the police this time. They scanned the whole premises, but the guy was gone. They took me into custody until my mom arrived at the station. After that incident, she started having a babysitter watch me again, all the way until I was 12. A long time ago, my girlfriend and I were looking for a private place to be alone together since our parents were always home. There was a vacant house on the corner of our block that hadn't been owned for years. The back door was always left unlocked. I would know because my friends and I had been in there before. We went in through the back, but before we could even get upstairs, there was a knock at the front door. We looked at each other with worry. What if someone had caught us sneaking in? She peeked out the window, but there was no one on the stoop. She made sure that the door was locked before turning back to me. I assured her it was just some kids playing ding-dong ditch. We made it only halfway up the stairs before the frantic knocking on the door came back. She checked the window again. The porch was still empty. She opened the door this time and still couldn't see anyone. I wanted to look tough to impress her, so I stepped outside and yelled at the pranksters to try it again. I shut the door and waited behind it, hands on the doorknob, ready to throw the door open. I just waited there for at least a minute, and I was about to just forget about it when I heard the blood-curdling scream of my girlfriend. I turned to see what she was screaming at, and I screamed as well. Just barely in the dark, we could see the silhouette of a huge humanoid figure very slowly making its way down the stairs. It was moving in a hovering-like motion. We ran past it just in arm's reach and left the house the way we came. We ran all the way back to my house, both of us out of breath. We know it couldn't have been an old person. They had to be at least 7 feet tall. Nobody was supposed to be living in that house though. I even asked a friend living across the street from the house, and he said it had been vacant for years. The ghostly way the figure moved made it all the more disturbing. We both agreed to keep quiet about this story, but I still occasionally have a nightmare or bad thoughts about that night.
I was working the night shift at my local Waldbaum's back when it used to be open 24 hours a day. There would normally be less than 10 customers throughout my shift, but I wouldn't get to sit around and do nothing though. They wanted me to work on stock when I wasn't helping a customer. It was a bigger Waldbaum's, so oftentimes there may have been one other person in the building, whether it be someone working on stock or someone cleaning. This night, I was the only one working. I was working stock in the cereal aisle when I heard something fall over on the other side of the shelf in the next aisle over. I would always hear the door to the store sliding open. It was the loudest thing ever, so it kinda caught me off guard that there might have been a customer in the building. Of course, it wasn't weird. Yet. Not until I looked to my left and saw a man standing by the edge of the aisle, shooting me a blank stare. "Do you need something, sir?" I asked him. No. Could you just point me to the eggs?" he said. He wasn't normal looking. His face looked weird. Not exactly ugly, just unusual. Like his upper lip kind of came out too far. Almost like a Simpsons character. I was a bit uncomfortable that I had to deal with ringing him up. I hurried to finish the cereal aisle, and when I was done, I began to bring the U-boat cart to the back room. I was stopped halfway when the same guy cut me off through the middle section of the aisle. I want to note this guy was probably in his mid-30s, and at the time, I was only 22, though I looked much younger. The guy stopped me and started trying to make awkward small talk. He started by asking me my name, how old I was, if and where I went to school, and why I was doing the night shift. His questions started to get weirder when he asked me if I went to parties a lot and if I had a girlfriend. I told him I didn't, and then he asked me if I've ever had a boyfriend while putting his hand on my shoulder. I immediately started walking away with the cart, but he followed me. I told him I wasn't into whatever he was thinking about. I went faster and faster until I finally made it to the back storage room. He didn't follow me in. I wasn't supposed to stay back there for extended periods of time to avoid customer theft. I decided it would be best to just wait for him by the register so that he would ring his stuff up and leave. But I waited there for at least 20 minutes. He never came. I decided he was gone, and whether he stole the eggs and something else, there wasn't anything I could do now. I had to go to the bathroom, so I took a quick jog to the back of the store and into the employee bathroom. Moments after sitting on the toilet, my heart dropped into my stomach as I heard the bathroom door open. I choked the urge to say something. Something like, "You can't be in here," but I didn't want to give away my position. I lifted my leg so that I wouldn't be visible from under the stall, and what happened next was simply horrifying. I sat there for the longest time, looking at the floor, not moving a muscle. When I finally looked up, I could see an eye peering through the crack of the stall door. I screamed. I knew I was trapped. I knew I had one shot at making a move. I grabbed the box cutter in my pocket and began sliding it through the crack of the door, forcing him to move his eye away. I took that chance to slam the stall door open in his face and hightail it out of the bathroom and all the way out of the store. I called my boss at least 5 times before he finally picked up and explained everything. He told me to call the cops, and so I did. Of course, the man wasn't in the store anymore by the time the cops showed up. I only did the night shift twice after that, and luckily didn't see the man again. I used to work the night shift at a gas station on the side of some highway in the country. From the hours of 12 a.m. to 6 a.m., the road was pretty dead. I would have maybe 1 or 2 people come in to pick cash in a whole night. It was a very boring and depressing job, especially doing the graveyard shift, but I had just finished college and I needed to pay off my loans. The only reason I kept this job was because my boss threw me an extra $5 an hour for doing the night shift. On this one cold December night, I was doing my usual thing, reading the newspaper, playing games on my phone, and whatnot, when I noticed the headlights of a car pulling off the highway into the parking lot. It was a red pickup truck. Somebody stepped out and shut the door. I went back to reading the paper as I saw that he was standing by the gas pump. I assumed he wasn't paying cash. I looked up a few moments later and saw that he was still standing in the same position, staring at the gas pump. I almost felt obligated to go out and help him. He was obviously confused. I felt a cold chill run up my spine as I saw the 6-foot-something tall man slowly turn his head to face me. I couldn't make out any features of his face, but I knew he was staring at me. I tried to pretend I didn't notice by going back to reading the paper. Of course, I wasn't really reading now. I was a bit shaken by the guy out there. I just wanted him to pay debit or credit and leave. I looked up and gasped as the man was now much closer to the front door of the building. It wouldn't have been so disturbing if it weren't for the fact that he wasn't moving. He was just standing still, as before, still looking in my direction. I walked over to the door to get a closer look. All I could see in his face was still blackness. I locked the door and flipped the open sign to closed on the door. I didn't care if this would possibly get me in trouble. I was not taking a chance because, quite frankly, I was scared shitless. I walked back behind the counter and sat down on one of the containers on the floor just so I couldn't see the man outside anymore. I stayed in that position for a good 5 minutes, texting every friend I have to see who was awake. I was desperate to tell somebody about this. When I finally got up to check that he was gone, I let out a full scream as the man was now right outside the door. I picked up the phone on the counter and called the police. The operator was reluctant to send somebody over because of the way I described the situation, but I persuaded them. I hid behind the counter, balled up like a child. I began to hear heavy thumps at the door, not innocent knocks to catch my attention. I mean thuds and thumps, trying to break down the door. And then eventually it finally stopped. I heard the sound of a car starting outside and then driving off. I looked outside and he was gone. A patrol cop along with a state trooper pulled into the parking lot. I reported the red pickup truck and told them which direction I thought he went in. I couldn't describe his face as all I saw was blackness. Of course, there wasn't much the police could do as the man didn't really do anything. I left that job a few months later to a job in the city. It was 2 years ago. I was called in to do the night shift, 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. at 7-Eleven, since somebody called out. The store was located on a busy road in a rather quiet and rural area. During the night shift, you could expect anywhere from 10 to 20 people come in to buy a beer or something else. This one particular night, There was this one guy, mid-20s, that came in. He started making weird noises, like loud yelling noises. I assumed he had some kind of mental disability. In fact, my brother has a mental disability, so I immediately felt sympathy for the guy. He walked up to the counter without any items, with his head facing me, but his eyes were looking up at the ceiling. I felt uncomfortable. I honestly didn't know how to deal with it. I tried speaking with him, but he only responded in loud noises. I kept checking if he was with someone outside, but he was alone. There weren't any cars in the parking lot, so I assumed he walked. He stood there for so long, looking up at the ceiling and making noises, that I tried to get him out by handing him a bag of chips and telling him he can go. I tried finding some kind of number to call for someone to help him. Then, out of nowhere, he finally turned around and walked out of the store. I felt so horrible for the man, but at the same time, I felt a bit creeped out. About an hour later, the phone on the counter rang. I picked up to hear the familiar yelling sounds of the man from earlier. It caught me off guard. I didn't know what to think, other than this has to be some kind of prank. I hung up on them and was now becoming paranoid of my surroundings, constantly checking the outside through the windows. Come 4 o'clock, the person working after me came in, finally allowing for me to go home. It wasn't my problem anymore. I got home and threw all my stuff on the table, ready to get to sleep. But my phone rang within a minute after entering the door. I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would someone be calling at 4 a.m.? I could only imagine it was bad news. I braced myself and picked up the phone to hear the man again. I felt sick to my stomach as I listened to the loud noises he made. I struggled to slam the phone to the receiver. All night I felt like I was being watched, even with all the blinds shut. And I could swear I heard strange noises coming from all over my house. I refused to get any sleep until the sun came up. Weeks passed and I had forgotten about the incident, until one day, when going into the basement for the first time in a while, I found that papers had been scattered all over the floor, and when I went into the basement closet, I found writing on the walls. 7-Eleven had been written in Sharpie on the wall, along with the address to the 7-Eleven I worked at and my house address. The most disturbing part, I also found various kitchen knives along with a large pocket knife sitting in the closet. What started out as seemingly just an innocent person turning into something of a prank ultimately turned into something much more horrifying. He had been living down there for God knows how long, and I'm just grateful that for whatever reason he changed his mind and left, because I haven't seen or heard from him since. All I can say is that man is dangerously ill. I've worked in the K-9 unit for 9 years, and I've worked my fair share of graveyard shifts. I've definitely come across weird things at night, but I'll never forget this one night. I worked with my dog Sammy, a German Shepherd. She was 2 years old at the time and was still kind of new to the job, just like me. I was driving down a road surrounded by crops when I spotted a suspicious-looking white van parked inside the crops. Both doors were open. I flashed my lights to try and draw out whoever was there. Nobody came out, so I parked and scanned the place out quickly. Nobody was in sight, so I took Sammy with me to track down the driver of the van. Sammy started going crazy when we reached the trunk of the van. She was pulling so hard she almost broke off the leash. I opened the trunk to the van, and a blast of foul air hit me in the face. I almost passed out from the mix of the horrible smell and the pure shock of what I saw in the trunk. I counted 7 full body bags, each with a pair of feet sticking out at the bottom. I requested immediate backup with my radio. I heard the sound of a twig snapping nearby, and Sammy just lost it. I lost grip of the leash, and she took off into the crops. I pulled out my gun and followed the sounds of her barking. As each and every crop hit me in the face, I felt as if something would reach out and grab me. I stopped when I could no longer hear Sammy's barking. But as I stopped, the sounds of movement did not. I realized I heard movement in all directions. I had never experienced such fear in my life. I stood still as the movement around me stopped. And then, out of nowhere, I felt two arms wrap around my throat. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fight. I was going to die. And then, I heard the sound of Sammy's bark, followed by the scream of the man choking me as Sammy bit down on his leg. The next thing I did is something that I still question if it was appropriate doing to this day. I turned around and pulled the trigger, killing the man. I grabbed Sammy by the leash and ran all the way back to the car. I could tell people were following us from behind. I managed to make it to the car safely and drive a quarter-mile down the road. I didn't stop to see which way they went. I didn't hold my ground. I fled like a coward. I cared much more about our lives than I did this job, and I'll still say that today. But it still pains me knowing how much of a coward I was. Backup arrived shortly, but the van was gone. I even failed to get the plate number on dashcam video, or even just writing it down. This was within my first few months on the force, but it made me feel like absolute shit for months to come. I, someone who was sworn to protect, let a van full of killers get away.
Back in 2020, when the pandemic was still causing all kinds of chaos, I started driving for Uber to make ends meet. I was laid off from my retail job and needed quick income. The thing about rideshare gigs is you see all kinds of people, especially when you're working late nights like I was. There were awkward encounters, drunk passengers, weird conversations, but none of that compares to what happened one Friday night in October. It was a little after midnight, and I had just dropped someone off at a hotel near the outskirts of town. My app pinged almost immediately with a new request. The pickup location was about 6 minutes away, in front of a bowling alley that was part of a strip mall. Pretty standard stuff. The name on the ride said Derek. I accepted it and started heading over. The area was quiet when I arrived, just a few dim parking lot lights. No cars in sight, and the bowling alley looked closed. But there was a man standing alone under one of the lights, wearing a gray hoodie and jeans. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with his hands in his pockets, head down like he was looking at his shoes. As I pulled up, he looked at me, but didn't wave or move. I rolled down the window and said, "You Derek?" He nodded slowly, walked over, and got into the back seat behind me. I started the trip and asked him if the destination in the app was correct, an address about 20 minutes away in a residential neighborhood I'd never been to. He said, "Yeah, that's right," in a quiet, calm voice. I remember thinking he sounded a little off. Not drunk or high, just sort of flat, emotionless. But I didn't think too hard about it at the time. I started driving, and he didn't say anything for the next 5 or 6 minutes. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror now and then, and every time I looked, he was staring straight ahead. Not out the window or at his phone, just at the back of my head. I tried to break the silence by asking how his night was going. He paused, then said, "Just needed to get out of there." I asked, "Out of where?" He said, "Doesn't matter." So I didn't push it. We drove a while longer. About 15 minutes in, I realized we were getting closer to the destination, but the address was in a really isolated part of town. No streetlights, big yards, and lots of trees. As we approached the address, he suddenly leaned forward and said, "Actually, can you pull into that driveway right there?" He pointed to a house on the right. The house was dark, no lights on inside or out. It looked old and abandoned, honestly. It had an overgrown lawn and paint peeling on the siding. There was also no car in the driveway. I said, "Is this your place?" And he said, "Just pull in." I hesitated, but turned into the driveway. I stopped near the front of the house and put the car in park. He didn't get out. I looked back at him and said, "Everything all right?" He stared at the front door and said, "Wait here." Then he got out and started walking toward the house. He didn't go to the front door. He walked around the side of the building and disappeared from view. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, trying to decide what to do. The ride was technically still going. I didn't want to drive off and get penalized, but I also felt like something wasn't right. My gut told me this guy wasn't just heading inside to grab something. Finally, I ended the trip manually. I marked it as complete and started to back out of the driveway, but before I could shift into reverse, I saw him walking back toward the car, fast. His hands were empty, and he had this strange look on his face, like he was angry or excited. I unlocked the doors because I didn't want to make it a confrontation, but something in me was screaming not to let him back in. He opened the rear door, got in, and said, "Take me to the other place." I asked, "What other place?" He said, "Just drive, I'll tell you." I said, "You need to put it in the app." He didn't answer. He just stared at me in the mirror. I said again, "I can't take you anywhere unless you put it in the app." He didn't say a word. After a few seconds, he told me to drive to where I picked him up. I didn't want to argue anymore, so I started heading back toward the strip mall. The whole way there, I felt this pressure in the car. He wasn't talking, but I could feel him watching me. The hairs on my arms were standing up. He was still staring at the back of my head. At one point, I tried to lighten the mood. I said, "Rough night?" He replied, "You could say that." I asked if everything's all right, and he said, "Not yet." I didn't ask any more questions. When we got back to the strip mall, I parked under the same light where I picked him up, but before I could say anything, he leaned forward and asked, "You ever wonder how you're gonna die?" I froze. I laughed awkwardly and said, "Not really something I think about." He didn't laugh. He just leaned back in his seat, and after a few seconds, he said, "I think about it all the time." Then he opened the door and got out without another word. He didn't close the door right away. He just stood there for a second, half in and half out of the car. Then he looked at me and said, "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." He shut the door and walked off into the darkness behind the bowling alley. I sat there for a minute, too shaken to move. Eventually, I drove home, constantly checking my mirrors. When I got home, I looked at the trip details again. Something was off. The name had changed. It no longer said Derek. It was blank. No name, no profile picture, no trip history. It was like the ride never happened. I contacted Uber support to report it, but they told me the trip data was unavailable. They said sometimes that happens if the app crashes or if the rider cancels midway. But I know what I saw. I know I completed the trip. I know the man got in and out of my car, and I know he said what he said. "You picked the wrong guy up tonight." I've never seen him again, and I hope I never do. But every time I get a ping in a dimly lit parking lot or have a silent passenger in the back seat, I remember that night. And I remember that feeling that something terrible could have happened. That maybe he changed his mind at the last second, or maybe he was never planning to do anything, just wanted to scare someone. But I still wonder what he meant, and if he ever found the right car. This happened in 2021 when I was driving for Uber full-time. I live in a city that gets a lot of tourists, especially in the summer, so rideshare gigs can be decent money if you're consistent. I worked mostly nights, partly because I'm a night owl, and partly because it's less traffic and better tips from drunk passengers coming back from bars. The night this happened, it was around 1:30 in the morning, a pretty normal Saturday night crowd. I had just dropped off a group of college kids who wouldn't stop yelling in the back of my car, so I was glad to get a request that looked quieter. The name said Chris, and the pickup location was a small side street just off downtown. The weird thing was, the pin was in kind of an odd area, not near any bars or apartments, more like near the back lot of an old strip mall. But I figured maybe it was just a bad GPS marker. It happens sometimes. I drove over and saw a guy standing at the corner, hoodie on, jeans, staring down at his phone. I pulled up and said, "Chris?" He nodded and got in the back without saying much. He didn't smell like alcohol or slur his words. He seemed sober and just really quiet. He didn't say hello, nor did he answer when I asked how his night was going. Some people just aren't talkers, so I didn't think much of it. I started the ride, and the drop-off was on the opposite side of town, 25 minutes away, in a suburban neighborhood I'd been to maybe once or twice before. The thing was, it was dark out there, like no streetlights in some areas. Pretty isolated. I noticed about 5 minutes into the trip that Chris had his phone out, but he wasn't texting or calling anyone. He was holding it flat in his lap with the flashlight on, just shining the beam upward, slightly toward my seat. I asked him kind of half joking, "Everything all right back there?" He just mumbled, "Yeah," and then turned the flashlight off. The next 20 minutes were dead silent, just the hum of the engine and a weird tension building in the car. I don't know how to describe it. Something just felt off about this guy. Not threatening, but definitely unsettled, like he wasn't really there. We got to the neighborhood, and I followed the GPS to the house. But as we pulled up, I noticed it was totally dark. No porch light, no inside lights, nothing. I asked, "Is this the right place?" Chris didn't answer. He just sat there. I turned around and looked at him. I repeated myself a little louder, saying, "Hey, is this it?" He stared past me out the window. I repeated myself one more time, and finally he nodded. So I put the car in park and said, "Have a good night." He didn't move. He just sat there. So I asked again, "Are you good?" He finally reached for the handle and stepped out, but he didn't close the door. He just stood outside the car with the door open, facing the house. I sat there waiting. A few seconds passed, then 20, and then a full minute. I was just about to say something when he suddenly turned around, looked at me through the open door and said, "I need to go back." I blinked and said, "Back where?" He said, "Where you picked me up." His tone was flat with no emotion. I didn't know what to say. That was a 25-minute drive, and it wasn't like I could just reverse the trip. I told him he'd have to request a new ride, but he just stared at me. He begged me, saying, "Please, I need to go back." I told him again, "You need to request it through the app." That's when he said something that sent chills up my spine. He said, "I can't. They're not gone yet." My only response could be, "Who's not gone?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, still holding the door open, and I noticed he was breathing heavily. At that point, I started getting seriously uncomfortable. I said, "Look, I can't just start a new ride unless you request it." He stared for another second, then slowly backed away and closed the door. He walked toward the house, even though it was pitch black and looked empty. I waited until he got to the porch before I pulled off. The moment I turned the corner, I ended the trip in the app and started heading back toward downtown. A couple blocks down, I stopped at a 24-hour gas station to use the bathroom and get a drink. I parked at the side of the building, went inside, and came back out maybe 4 minutes later. And when I got back to my car, I felt like my brain short-circuited. Chris was sitting in the back seat, same hoodie and same expression. I thought I had locked the doors before going inside, but somehow he was in the back of the car. I opened the driver's side door and stepped back in slowly, keeping my eye on him through the mirror. "How did you get back in?" I asked. He just said, "Take me back." I said, "I'm calling the cops," and reached for my phone. That's when he leaned forward, close enough for me to hear his breath, and said, "They're still in the house." I don't know why, but I didn't call the police. Something about the way he said that made me feel like he was having some kind of episode. I played along and said, "Whose house is that?" And he said, "My parents." I asked him if he lived there, and he said not anymore. That made the hairs stand up on my neck. I started slowly driving back to where I picked him up. Every part of me was screaming not to do it, but I didn't know what else to do. As we got closer, he started breathing heavier. He was rocking slightly in the back seat. At one point, he whispered, "They're still there. They won't leave, no matter what I do." When we pulled up to the house, there were still no lights, still no signs of anyone living there. He got out without saying anything and then walked up to the front door and stood there. He didn't knock or anything, he just stood still. I waited maybe 30 seconds, then pulled away again, making damn sure the doors were locked. I drove 3 blocks, parked under a streetlight, and sat there for 10 minutes trying to process what just happened. I debated calling the cops, but what would I even say? That a guy got into my car twice and said weird things? There was no crime technically as far as I knew, so I just drove home and didn't sleep that night. The next day, I reported the ride to Uber, and honestly, I regretted not reporting this to the police because the man might have been sick in the head needing help. I hope he didn't hurt anyone. Who knows if that house was even really his parents' house, or if he actually was just having a manic episode. I'm an 18-year-old girl that lives alone in my apartment with my dog. I live about 8 miles out of town, so getting food delivered can be a hassle sometimes. I never thought anything of Uber Eats being bad. You may hear some stories, but never think they will happen to you. At least that's what I thought. It was Friday evening. I was cleaning my apartment, getting ready for my boyfriend to come over. We're long distance, so I only get to see him on weekends, so I usually try to get it cleaned up before he arrives on Saturday. I had been cleaning for about 2 hours, and it was past 6 p.m., so I was feeling hungry. I didn't want to dirty any dishes, as I just cleaned them all and cleaned the kitchen. I decided to order food so I wouldn't have to make a mess. I ordered my food and got the notification that my driver was on his way and driving a white Honda Fit Sport. I'm a young girl living on my own, so I have my delivery instructions set to leave my order at my door for contactless delivery. I was sitting in my living room watching TV when I got the notification that my food was delivered. As soon as I got that notification, I jumped up, eager to get my food. I was starving. When I opened the door to grab my food, it wasn't there, so I thought maybe he set it at the wrong door. But looking down at all the doors, none of them had the food at them. So I went back in and was gonna message him when I heard a knock at my door. It was my next door neighbor. He was holding my food. He said, "Hey, sorry, I picked up your food from your delivery driver because he was looking through your windows and I wasn't sure what he was doing." I took the food and thanked him, wondering what the hell just happened. I went back in, ate my food, and enjoyed a movie when I started to get ready for bed. I took a shower, then went to turn off my TV and make sure all my doors were locked before going to bed. I laid down in bed, called my boyfriend, and eventually ended up falling asleep. I woke up a few times during the night to my dog growling at the window or the back door. My dog isn't a huge, scary dog. He's a small 5-pound Morkie, but it's still pretty scary when he growls at something and catches you off guard. I finally got him to calm down and go back to sleep. It wasn't even 15 minutes later that I woke up to banging on my window. My dog started going crazy, barking, growling, and even whimpering. I couldn't move in my bed. I took the bed sheets and pulled them over my head, just leaving enough to not cover my eyes so I could see the window. I called the police and whispered into the phone quietly. I explained to the operator that someone is in my backyard and my window doesn't lock so it can easily be lifted up. She told me to go to a different room and police would be at my apartment shortly. I ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife, just waiting to see blue and red lights or hear sirens. It felt like forever. I looked out the window of my kitchen and never expected to see what I saw. The Uber driver's car that delivered my food. His car was sitting across the street from my apartment. When you open the door to my apartment, there's a large open field to the left that's used for parking trailers and letting dogs play. He was parked there, but I didn't see anyone in the car. I put two and two together and thought to myself, he's in my backyard. The police finally arrived. I could barely even speak. I was shaking and crying. I explained to one officer what happened, while the other went to check out my backyard, which is where my bedroom window is. Another officer who arrived went to check his car because it was still in the field, but he wasn't in his car. The two officers came back and started talking with the officer I was speaking to, telling her there's footprints in my backyard, which it had just rained the night before, so it was very muddy outside. I started panicking once I heard that, not just because that's not what you want to hear, but also because where was this guy if he didn't come back arrested with the cops and wasn't in his car? My neighbor came outside to see what was going on. The officers explained to him what was happening. Then he spoke about how he picked up my food for me earlier that day. The neighbor invited me to sleep over at his apartment for the night if it made me feel any better. Oddly, I passed on the offer, and when all the cops left, I went back into my apartment. Thinking it was all over, I took a few hours to get comfortable enough to fall asleep. But at 2 a.m., I woke up to banging on my front door and heard police. There's no way this is happening right now, I thought to myself. I got up and went to my front door, scared to open it. It was the woman I spoke to earlier. She explained they stayed at my apartment, hidden to watch for that guy, in case he showed back up. And he did. They caught him walking up to my front door, thinking he was going to try to find a way in. My heart fell to my stomach when I heard her say that. She then explained he was arrested, and I don't have to worry about him anymore. I thanked her, and went back to try and sleep. Unfortunately, I couldn't fall asleep this time. I also don't use Uber Eats anymore when I'm home alone. I was 26 at the time, and I'm male. I was in Washington, D.C. on a sort of vacation visiting my then fiancée. I'll call her Sarah for the sake of the story. I was visiting for a graduation she was having for her basic training. It was a big deal for her family, and she asked me to be there for it, so I said why not and booked a flight to be there. I'd be arriving about a week before the rest of her family, so she and I could have some time, just the two of us, before she would be busy with having all of her family there for the occasion. She stayed with me at my hotel during this time, and eventually we decided we wanted to go and explore some of the nearby historical sites that Washington had to offer. I'd never been there, of course, so the idea piqued my interest and we decided to do it. Once we arrived at our location, we spent about 4 hours walking around and seeing all the sights, from the Lincoln Memorial to the Washington Monument, the Congress Building, and even the White House. It really was a fun and exciting experience for myself to see all these places, as I had missed out on going on a school trip in high school to visit them. Sarah at the time seemed to appreciate my interest in them as well, and we really enjoyed ourselves. After we finally decided we had enough walking around and were ready to return to the hotel, we used the Uber app to call for a ride. We had used it earlier to arrive and had no issues, so we decided to just use it again for the ride back. Sarah made the request on her phone, while I sat down under some shade and waited. I was pretty tired from all the walking we did, and I could feel my body just ready to get back to the hotel for a long-needed nap. Eventually, after about 10 minutes of waiting, a car pulled up in front of us along the side of the road. Sarah motioned for me that this was the car, as the place they stopped at was not a parking spot or a place a car would just stop at on its own. I stood up and followed her to the car, where she opened the back door and stepped inside, asking the man, "Uber for Sarah?" And he gave a slight nod without saying anything. So I followed her into the car and shut the door behind me. Now looking back on this, I realized how stupid both her and myself were in doing this. We should have asked for the driver's name and verified the car was a match to the one on the app. I didn't have access to any of this myself, and she made the request on her phone, so it didn't really cross my mind at the time to do any of this. As we both sat in the back of the car, which was a gray-colored minivan, the driver didn't speak to us. I found this a bit odd, as any other driver I'd ever had would at the very least greet me once I entered or confirmed my name. But this guy, nothing. He started driving without acknowledging either of us, other than the nod he gave when Sarah asked him if he was our Uber. And I did pick up on how weird it was, but I was tired and didn't really feel like trying to engage with the man myself. I laid my head back and just closed my eyes. I then felt a tap on my arm from Sarah after what felt like only 5 minutes of the drive. I opened my eyes and looked at her, and she didn't speak to me. I could see the look on her face was one of worry, and it had me wondering what exactly she was concerned about. She then pointed to her phone, which was showing the route the Uber would take to drive us back to our hotel. It didn't take me long to realize that the way we were going was not the way the route had said. In fact, it was the opposite way. I could see Sarah's face drain with color shortly after, when a notification popped up on her phone saying our Uber had arrived, followed by a message from the driver asking where we were. My heart sank into the pit of my stomach. It was then I realized how dumb I was by not verifying the car and driver before we just both stepped in. The picture that was on Sarah's phone within the app did not match the driver, and I knew we had gotten ourselves into a situation. I slowly looked back towards the driver, but I didn't say anything. I didn't know what this man's intentions were, or what he was capable of, and honestly, I didn't want to find out. I just knew at that moment, I had to get both Sarah and I out of that car. I leaned forward and told the man that we had changed our minds and would be fine just being let out where we were in an attempt to get us out of the situation without alarming the man of what we knew. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror in the first actual acknowledgement of us he had given since we stepped into the vehicle. I caught his glance as he stared at me without saying a word in what felt like minutes, but was probably only 10 seconds. He didn't stop the car though. He didn't even say a word in response to me, and just kept driving the car as if nothing had been said. My patience had run out, and I knew whatever this man had in store for us wasn't good. I then did the only thing I could think of at that moment and reached into my pocket, pulling out my pocket knife. I flipped the blade out, and without wasting another second, I told the driver, "I know you're not our Uber driver. I don't know what your plan is here or what you think you're about to do to us, but I have a knife, and if you don't pull this car over right now, I have no problem using it." The driver's eyes quickly looked at me again within the rearview mirror, and I knew he could see the knife gripped tightly in my hand. He quickly pulled the van over, and I heard the doors unlock. Sarah and I wasted no time in getting out of that car as fast as we could. The moment we were both out, the man sped off. We quickly took a moment to gather ourselves, as Sarah was having a panic attack, and I myself was still wrapping my head around what the hell just happened. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and responded to our actual Uber driver, and informed him of our location and asked if he could come pick us up. The actual driver arrived within a few minutes, and this time we made sure it was the right one. We told him everything that had happened, and it was then that he informed us something that made the blood in my veins go cold. He told us there had been multiple instances recently where people were posing as Uber drivers in the area, as it was an easy way to find many tourists and people not from the area that wouldn't think twice about just getting into a car thinking it was a Lyft or Uber. Apparently, many people had gone missing, and they could only assume the worst. He told us both we were lucky we noticed when we did, and hadn't gotten further away from where we had been picked up, which was probably the only reason the man let us go, and of course the fact that I was armed. We made it back to the hotel without issue, and we quickly reported it to the police. We gave the best description of the man and the car that we both could, and the police told us they'd call us with any information they could find. We never heard back from them, so I assume the man was never caught or found, and that worries me that he could still be out there doing this to others. Again, I realized how stupid we both were after all this, not verifying whose car it was we were getting into. But let this be a reminder to everyone listening, do just that. Always verify your Uber drivers, and always make sure you're aware of your surroundings.
It was the summer of 2012. I have a late birthday, so I was still 15 when all my friends were 16. They all had jobs for the summer, but nobody would hire me because I was only 15. I started looking for off-the-books jobs on Craigslist. I found an ad titled, "Looking for House Cleaning Services, Paying $10 an Hour." The ad had 2 pictures of the house, one outside and one inside. It was a typical middle-class house. He lived in the next town over. The only way to contact him was by email, so I emailed him telling him I was only 15 years old and was willing to clean his house for $10 an hour. He responded in 10 minutes, telling me his work schedule and when he would need me to be available. I told him that was okay, and then he asked me if I had means of transportation to get there every day. I didn't even realize that my mom wouldn't be able to drive me every day. Oddly, he offered to give me a lift to and from every single day. He said he worked close, so coming home to give me a ride wouldn't be a problem. I agreed without even asking my mom, so the man asked for my address. I gave it to him, and he said he would be over at 8:30 a.m. on Monday to pick me up. Come Monday, I met him outside. He drove a black 05 Nissan Maxima. He himself had a black beard and a Mets hat on. He didn't seem dressed ready to go to work, but I didn't think much about that. He introduced himself as James, and then dropped me off and gave me the key. He told me to just straighten everything out and such. Then he drove off in a hurry. I found it really weird that he trusted me, a 15-year-old he had never met, to be in his house alone. His house wasn't even too messy. All I did was just fold some clothes, wash some dishes, and used a hand vacuum to clean some of the carpets. The only problem, it was extremely hot in the house. Even hotter than outside. It seemed all the windows were sealed shut, and I didn't want to turn on the AC without permission. This went on for 6 hours before he came back, handed me $60, and dropped me off back home. He seemed extremely nice, and I felt I had lucked out finding that ad. This went on for a good 2 weeks, and my mom was okay with it since James was actually paying me. Then, one Friday night, I woke up feeling really thirsty. So I got up to get some water. I looked out my window. and I saw somebody standing there looking into my room. I screamed and my parents came running over, but the person outside took off before they got there. The next time I went in, it was at least 100 degrees outside. I asked James if I could turn on the AC, but he said it was broken. He told me to just take off my clothes if I got hot. I laughed, thinking he was joking, but he was serious. I felt really uncomfortable after that. He dropped me off, and I did the same work that I had been doing. It was at least 105 degrees in the house. I had to work shirtless and constantly go outside where it was just a little cooler. The day dragged on, but I just barely made it through. The next day, on the way to his house, James told me that he had the day off from work. He told me he would just help me out. I was not happy to hear this. I would rather just be alone in the house. He seemed to slowly follow me into whatever room I went to clean. I eventually had to go to the bathroom, so I ran upstairs and made sure he wasn't following me. But in the bathroom, I made a shocking discovery. Up in the corner of the room, I found a small camera pointing from out of the wall, just barely visible. I scanned the room for more, and sure enough, there was one in the bottom corner as well. I started searching the whole bathroom for more cameras. I checked under the sink, but what I found was much worse. There were 2 huge stacks of VHS tapes, each one with a sticky note attached with someone's name on it. The one on the top was my name. I almost threw up then and there. I had to find a way to get home safely. James then knocked on the door, asking if I was alright. I said I wasn't feeling good, and asked if he could drive me home. He said okay. I stepped outside and he told me he had to go as well, so he stepped into the bathroom. For the first half of the car ride, he didn't say anything to me, and the road he was taking me on wasn't familiar. In fact, I noticed that the direction we were heading in was the complete opposite of my house. Where are we going?" I asked. He looked at me and said, "What were you doing in the bathroom?" I started to panic. I didn't answer, so he asked again in a much angrier voice. We were stopped at a traffic light, so I took that opportunity to unlock the door and escape the car. I ran away from sight before calling my mom, crying into the phone, telling her to pick me up. She came over as soon as possible. She immediately reported James, and the police found the tapes under his sink. Some of the tapes contained much worse things than kids just cleaning the house. The scariest thing, some of the kids seen in the tapes are still missing to this day. He was arrested and tried for child pornography, kidnapping, and some other charges. I'm happy I jumped out of that car, because I don't know where he was taking me. This happened about 3 months ago. Me and my roommate decided on getting a used couch, so I thought Craigslist would be a great place for used furniture. I scrolled through about 3 pages before finding a black leather couch. It was in really good condition, and it had a really good price, around $200. I told myself this was too good to be true, and man, I should have listened to myself. We arranged a price, and the guy told me to meet him at his place over email. My roommate was out working overtime, so I had to go alone. The address was a little ways out of town. The house was surrounded by trees. You had to go through the drive-thru to be able to see it. I got out of my car and knocked on the door. This house was different. It was small and wooden, and it looked pretty eerie. When I knocked the 3rd time, I heard creaks on the wood floor coming from inside. Anyone could tell it was footsteps, but it sounded like they were tiptoeing. Then I heard a faint, muffled voice through the door. "Hey, are you the couch guy?" But they sounded pretty rushed. So I responded, yes I am." He said back, "Okay, come around back, the couch is there." I felt a little weirded out by it, but I brushed it off. When I came around back, I saw something that I won't forget. I saw 4 tall men dressed in black robes with their hands together, and in front of them was a pit with a hatch and chain on it. Then I heard the same voice say, "Where's your friend?" I booked it out of there and frantically shoved the key in my car and started it. I looked out the mirror and saw the front door fly open. I shifted into first and floored it out of there. The thing that makes me uneasy to this day is that in the emails, I never told him I had a roommate. I was about 12 years old. I was looking for some craft storage since I got a lot for Christmas. The ones at the stores were really pricey, so me and my 27-year-old sister looked for some on Craigslist. We found someone offering a huge tote for only $10. That would mean getting a $90 discount, so we checked it out. The person lived relatively close to us, so we gave the guy our email. He emailed us within an hour and asked where we should meet. I said we should meet at Dollar Tree since it was a short walk away. He, to my surprise, asked to meet at my home. I lived in an apartment, so that would be inconvenient, so I said that we lived farther away. He said he could drive, but we said no. So we eventually said it was okay to meet at Dollar Tree, but he could only meet up at 9 p.m. I said that's okay, even though it would be dark by then. He said to meet up today. My sister worked the night shift tonight, so she said I could walk there and back and to just bring my wagon so I could just put the tote in it. She gave me $10 and I started walking at 8:30. I arrived just on time and I saw an old knocked up '06 Kia. I assumed it was him, so I yelled, "Hey, got the tote?" He got out of his car and said he left it at home. He asked if I wanted to take a drive with him to his house. I said I can't because it wasn't okay with my family. He said he would drive me home, and I firmly said no. He said if I came with him that I could get the tote for free. I got a very uneasy feeling. He said, "Hey, your address is 234 Letter Road, right?" My heart dropped into my stomach. I got freaked out and ran all the way home. I got home and ran upstairs like a demon was chasing me. I got in my room and locked all the doors and windows. I also covered them with black clothing and such. That night I was shaking like crazy. And then, I heard a hefty man coming up the stairs. Almost no one on my floor was up this late, and no hefty man lived there. I heard a voice, and I almost fainted. "Hey, you still want that tote? It's down in my car, come help me get it." I almost puked and fainted. I looked through the peephole to see the man's back facing my door. I watched him turn around, and I covered the peephole with a black shirt I had laying around from before. The doorknob started to wiggle. I went under the sink cabinet and was silent as a worm. He started to try to kick the door down, and eventually he did. I felt like I was ready to die. I grabbed an old broom that was sitting in the cabinet. The kicking down of the door woke up my neighbors, who came running in with a baseball bat. My neighbor whacked the guy in the face with the bat, and the guy fell to the floor. I got out with the broom and gave the man a wimpy whack before he stood up and tried to grab me. I physically jumped down the stairs and ran down the street to my sister's work like I was going to die, and I thought I was. I ran to the nurse's station and started to have a breakdown. I was crying and almost throwing up, and the nurses looked at me like I was just raped or something. I told them that a man was following me and was going to kill me. They got my sister and called the police. It turned out he was a serial rapist. Me and my sister moved, and she went away to college. When you decide to use Craigslist, make sure you deal local, and if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. I was 20 years old, still driving my grandpa's old Buick that he handed down, and I hated it. I wanted to drive something cooler and something more age appropriate. Well, I was making decent money, and I wanted to buy a Mustang, so I started searching Craigslist. And within a week, I found something that seemed unbelievable. A 2013 blue Mustang GT convertible, manual transmission, no accident history, with only 32,000 miles, and the shockingly low price of $16,000. I saw the ad was just posted 4 minutes ago, so I knew I had to act fast. I called the number listed, but it just went to voicemail. I called again, and this time on the fourth ring, a man picked up the phone. I told him I was interested in the car, and he started laughing and joking about how he had just listed it a few minutes ago. He honestly sounded almost too normal and friendly. He gave me his address, and I told him I'll be over at 6 to check it out. After hanging up and realizing this guy sounded normal, I was just so excited to think that I had just found such a good deal. I GPS'd the location. It was a long drive, about an hour. It took me far away from the suburbs that I was used to. The GPS said 2 minutes remaining in the drive, and I was kind of confused. The area I was in was very rural and poor. I pulled up to what the GPS said was the house. It was a shitty rundown old thing. I noticed there was no Mustang anywhere in sight. I felt uncomfortable with even getting out of the car. In fact, I just sat there looking at the house for a good 5 minutes, trying to decide if I should even go and knock on the door. An hour isn't by any means a short drive, but when something seems as sketchy as this seemed, you would understand. I saw the blinds from the window begin to shake, and then the front door opened, and a man, probably in his 50s, came outside. He gave me a wave and a smile. He actually looked somewhat normal. I turned the car off and went out to greet him. I asked him where the car was, and he said it was in the garage. He told me to follow him back inside. I didn't know why he was leading me into his house instead of the garage, but I went anyway. He made sure to shut the door behind me, even though I was going to myself. I was able to get a good look of his house, and I must say, it smelled disgusting, and it didn't have much, if any, furniture. He led me down a small flight of stairs and to a door. I heard some noises coming from beyond the door. The man just explained that it was his friend working on the car. That seemed weird. I also began to hear creaking coming from upstairs, as if someone was walking around. He looked up and said that must be his wife. I found it weird that he had to explain these noises. I wouldn't have thought it was weird otherwise. He finally opened the door, and I got a quick glimpse of his garage. It was completely empty. I took a look at the man, and as he stared back at me, I knew it was time to go. I didn't say anything, I just turned around and ran for the door, but somebody was standing there blocking it. I offered to give them all the money in my wallet to let me go. And then the first guy walked into the room with some sharp metal tool in his hand. I don't know what it was called, but I fled from the room in the opposite direction of the front door and thankfully found the back door. I fled into the backyard and went around the house to my car. I made it inside and started the engine. I stared at the house one more time. Nobody followed me. I saw the front door open again, and the two men from inside stood behind the storm door and just seemed to stare me down. I gave them the finger and drove off halfway down the road before calling the cops. I stayed nearby until I saw the cops pull up to the house. The two men, or however many people were in that house, were gone. Nobody had actually lived in that house for years. I went home feeling angry and disturbed, but also grateful that I escaped with my life. That night, I got a phone call from an unknown number at like 2 in the morning. I didn't answer, and they didn't leave a voicemail. 10 seconds later, I got a text from the same number saying, "Look outside your window." I had my blinds down and feared what might be on the other side, but I had a pretty good feeling. I called the cops yet again, letting the person outside know that I was as well. They arrived in a surprising 3 minutes and began to search the whole premises. They found him hiding in my bush outside my window. He was arrested. His name is Tony Schelling. He was, in fact, the same person I met at the house. My message to all is to not be an idiot while using websites like Craigslist.
I used to travel a lot for work, and most of the time I stayed in cheap but decent hotels because I didn't care about anything except having a bed and a shower. Nothing scary ever happened to me in any hotel before, so I never thought about danger or weird people. That changed during a trip I took for a training event in a small city in Pennsylvania. I checked into a regular-looking hotel that had a small lobby with old, depressing red carpet and a smell that reminded me of my grandma's house. The woman at the front desk gave me a room key, and I went up to my room on the 3rd floor. The hallway was very quiet and felt a little empty in a strange way. My room was pretty normal with a small bed, a desk, and a bathroom. I threw my bag on the bed, turned on the TV, and tried to relax. I was tired from driving for hours, so after showering and watching TV for a bit, I tried to fall asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard something sliding on the floor. At first I thought it was the ice machine or some noise from the hallway. I was half asleep and did not want to get up, but then I heard the soft sliding sound again. And this time it was right by the door. I turned on the lamp and looked at the door. Something small and white was sticking out from underneath. I got up slowly and picked it up. It was a folded piece of paper. There was handwriting inside, very messy and uneven. It was only a few words, telling me that someone was watching me from somewhere inside the hotel. My heart started beating harder because I had no idea who could have written that. I didn't hear any footsteps after the note appeared, and the hallway had been dead silent. I stood in the middle of my room, feeling unsure if I should open the door or stay inside. I decided to lock the chain lock and sit on the bed with my back against the wall. I kept the lamp on so the room would not be so dark. I felt too awake to sleep now. About 20 minutes passed before I heard the sliding sound again. I stared at the bottom of the door, waiting to see what would happen. Another small piece of paper slid through slowly, like someone was gently pushing it with one finger. I walked up to it and picked it up. The second note said something even stranger. It said that person had been inside my room earlier in the day before I arrived, and they liked watching people sleep in this hotel. The handwriting looked shakier than the first note. I felt a wave of fear go through my chest, because the idea that someone had been inside my room was too real to ignore. I looked around the room, even though I knew no one was in there right now. I checked under the bed, inside the closet, and behind the shower curtain, even though I already knew it was empty. After checking everything, I sat on the bed again, trying to decide if I should call the front desk, but it was after 2 a.m., and I had this paranoid feeling that the person sending the notes might be someone who worked at the hotel. The handwriting looked strange and shaky, maybe like an older person or someone who was unstable. I tried to calm myself down, thinking maybe this was some prank, but it felt too personal. I sat still for another half hour and tried to listen for any sound. Every tiny noise made my body tense up, even the air conditioner clicking or the pipes tapping. Everything made me jump. I told myself that if a third note came, I would go straight downstairs. I would not wait any longer. I kept my eyes on the door, but forced myself to breathe slowly. After a long period of silence, I started to relax again. But then, the third note came. The sliding sound was even slower this time, like the person wanted me to hear it. I walked up to the door again. The third note said something completely different from the first two. It said the person was already inside the room with me again. I stared at the words for a long time. I looked around the room again, even though I had checked everything before. I slowly turned in a full circle, expecting to see someone in the corner or behind the curtains. I couldn't even breathe normally now. The idea of someone hiding in the room with me made my chest feel tight. I grabbed my bag and made the decision to get out immediately. I went to the door and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. I unlatched the chain lock and opened the door quickly. I rushed out and slammed it behind me, then ran down the hallway trying to stay quiet but also wanting to get as far from that room as possible. When I reached the stairs, I looked back only once. At the far end of the hallway, I thought I saw a shadow move behind the corner near the last room. It looked like someone stepping back out of sight. I hurried downstairs to the front desk where a different employee was working. He looked half asleep, but when I told him what happened, he looked extremely confused. He said there were only 3 other guests on my floor, and none of them had been walking around. He offered to give me a new room or let me check out early. I decided to check out early and drive to a different hotel, even though it was after 3 a.m. Before leaving, I asked if someone could check my room to see if any windows were open or if anything was disturbed. He took me upstairs with a master key, and when we entered my room, everything looked normal. But the window lock was broken in a way that looked recent. The employee looked nervous and said maybe someone from outside had gotten in earlier. I grabbed my bag and left the moment he finished talking. I drove to a different hotel 20 minutes away and barely slept. The next morning, I called the original hotel to see if they had found anything else. They said nothing strange came up. No cameras caught anyone near my room. No other guests complained about anything. They made it seem like the whole thing was just a weird misunderstanding, but I didn't buy it. I think he was lying. Something strange was going on in that hotel. I still remember the feeling that someone was right outside my door watching me. And the worst part is I keep thinking about the third note saying the person was inside the room again. That's the part that doesn't make sense, and made me question if it was maybe a prank. But the broken window latch said otherwise. I checked everywhere. There was no one. The window latch being broken makes me think that the person might have been coming and going before I ever realized anything was happening. I never went anywhere near that hotel again. I stayed at a hotel in Virginia during a long drive to visit family because I was too tired to keep going. It was late at night, almost midnight, and the hotel looked basic but clean. The parking lot had only a few cars, and most of the building looked dark from the outside. When I walked into the lobby, the man at the front desk barely looked up. He gave me my key and I went to the third floor. Most of the lights were dim, and every door I passed had the Do Not Disturb sign hanging, like no one wanted to be bothered. Definitely the type of hotel that people stay at out of necessity only. My room was at the end of the hallway. When I opened the door, the room looked fine, but a little messy in a way I couldn't explain. Like the lamp was tilted, one of the drawers to the dresser was slightly open, the blanket on the bed had a small wrinkle near the corner, as if someone sat there recently. It looked like housekeeping rushed or simply just did not care. I dropped my bag on the chair, turned on the TV, and got ready for bed. I got into bed and tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about how messy the room was when I came in. The more I thought about it, the more weird it seemed. I remembered that the front desk man didn't even mention housekeeping when he checked me in, and the whole hotel felt too empty, but I forced myself to ignore it and finally drifted off. I don't know how long I slept, but I woke up to the sound of my doorknob turning slowly. It was such a faint sound at first that I thought maybe the air conditioner made it, but then the handle clicked lightly again, like someone trying to test the lock without waking me. I stared at the door. The room was dark except for the glow from the TV, which I had forgotten to turn off. I could see the shadow of the door handle move slightly. Someone was outside trying to open it. After a few seconds, the handle stopped moving. I stayed still, waiting for another noise. Then the sound came again, but it was different. It was a small metal scraping against the lock. It sounded like someone sliding a key into the keyhole. But that didn't make sense because no one should have a key to my room besides staff. The key turned, but the door never opened. I could see a thin sliver of hallway light in the gap. The door pushed gently once, then stopped. I waited for a voice or footsteps, but there was nothing. Then the door closed softly again, like the person walked away. I stayed awake for almost an hour, listening for footsteps or any sound in the hall. When nothing happened, I convinced myself it was maybe a staff member who mixed up room numbers, and when they realized, they left. I went to relock the door, then I fell asleep again from exhaustion. Fast forward to like 2:15 a.m., and I remember that specifically. I woke again to something that at first I wasn't sure what it was. All I know is I heard the slightest rustling sounds in the room, and I knew someone was in there with me. I was scared to sit up and look, but I did. And then the rustling stopped. I noticed even in the darkness of the room, the slightest sight of a shadowy figure, barely visible in the dark, hovering over my bag in the corner of the room. I said in a panicked, shaky voice, "Who is that?" And a deep man's voice responded, "It's housekeeping. Sorry, I'll leave now." I didn't even respond. I was so shook, but I saw the black mass move from my bag to the door, and then the door opened and closed. I immediately flicked on the light and rushed to the door to put on the chain lock. I went to my bag and saw that it had clearly been gone through. I had to gather myself for a few minutes before calling the front desk. I told them someone with a key just broke into my room and was going through my stuff. The front desk person said that no housekeeping staff was currently there. I packed all my stuff and rushed to the little lobby where I called the police and demanded they check the video surveillance footage. When police arrived, that's when the desk worker agreed to show the surveillance footage, and it showed a large, scary-looking man repeatedly walking down the halls all sketchy-like, going to my door multiple times, and then finally entering my room with a key. The man at the front desk said that the man didn't work there, and he must have somehow stolen a master key from the hotel. I got my money back and immediately fled from that hotel, driving another half hour and eventually sleeping in my car. This experience somewhat permanently tainted my opinion of hotels, unfortunately. I wonder if I could have pressed charges on the hotel for negligence or endangering a guest, or anything like that really, but I never bothered. I just try to block it out now. I used to work night shifts for a small delivery company, so on my off days I would take short weekend trips alone just to get out of the house. During one of these trips, I stayed at a cheap hotel in New Jersey because it was close to a hiking trail I wanted to check out the next morning. The hotel wasn't terrible, but it had that old smell, and the hallways were too quiet, like no one else was staying there. I checked in during the early evening, and the woman at the front desk told me housekeeping had already cleaned all the rooms for the night. I didn't think about that detail until later when everything unfolded. My room was on the second floor, and the hallway light flickered when I walked to my door. I didn't pay much mind to how creepy the hotel was because I was just so tired. I wanted to eat, shower, and go to sleep. The room looked clean at first glance. The sheets were tucked in perfectly, but the pillow on the chair looked a little crooked. I fixed it without thinking and turned on the small TV. After relaxing for a bit and eating snacks, I got in the shower. When I came out, the bathroom mirror was foggy and the room felt colder than before. I brushed it off and got into bed. The room had a dark corner near the small closet, and I kept noticing it out of the corner of my eye. It made me feel like someone was standing there, even though I knew it was empty. I fell asleep eventually, but I woke up sometime after midnight because I heard a strange, soft noise. It sounded like something sliding on the carpet in the corner of the room. I opened my eyes slowly and listened. The room was dim because the curtains were thin and some light from the parking lot came through. I thought maybe I was imagining things because I was still half asleep. Then I heard a quiet breathing sound, not mine, and it was coming from near the closet. I stayed completely still because I got scared instantly. The breathing was slow, like someone trying to stay quiet but struggling. I told myself it had to be the air conditioner, but the unit was on the other side of the room, and it made a totally different sound. I didn't want to sit up because I was afraid of what I might see, but eventually I forced myself to. I slowly pushed myself up on my elbows and looked toward the closet. I couldn't see anything at first, it was just a dark corner. But then I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The closet door, which I knew I had left completely open after checking it earlier, was now slightly closed. Not fully, but enough that it looked touched. I stared at the gap and tried to listen. The breathing stopped the second I sat up, and that made me even more scared because it meant something or someone realized I was awake. I wanted to run out of the room, but I was frozen in place. After a minute of silence, I got up very slowly and walked backward toward the door while keeping my eyes on the closet. I reached for the doorknob, turned it carefully, and stepped into the hallway. The hallway was empty and felt even quieter than before. My heart was beating so fast I felt lightheaded. I went downstairs to the front desk, but no one was there. The desk phone was ringing like someone called the hotel, but no one picked up. I didn't know if I should wait or try to find someone else. I didn't want to go back upstairs alone. After a few minutes, the woman who worked the front desk finally came out of the back room looking tired. I told her someone was in my room. She looked confused and said housekeeping was gone for the night, and no one else had keys to guest rooms except for her and one older housekeeper who left hours ago. She offered to check the room with me or move to another, but she seemed so calm that it made me doubt myself a little. I asked her to come with me back to the room just to check. We went upstairs together. I expected to see the closet wide open or something messed up, but when we entered the room, everything looked normal. The closet was fully open again. The pillow on the chair was straight. Nothing seemed touched, even though I knew something had changed earlier. The woman checked behind the curtains and in the bathroom and under the bed, and she found nothing. She said maybe I had a nightmare or woke up confused, and honestly this kind of offended me, but I didn't want to argue with her because I was tired and embarrassed, so I decided to switch to another room down the hall. She gave me a different key and left me alone. I moved my stuff to the new room quickly and locked the door. I checked every corner twice before lying down again. I tried to sleep, but the fear kept my eyes open. It was only around 1 a.m. and the night felt never-ending. I kept listening for anything strange. After about an hour, I finally started drifting off when I heard something that made my entire body turn cold. It was the sound of a housekeeping cart rolling down the hallway very slowly. The squeaky wheels echoed down the hall. The problem was that it was way past housekeeping hours, and the woman at the front desk said no one else was working. I sat up in bed and listened. The cart's wheels stopped right outside my new door. I didn't move. I held my breath for a bit so I could listen. Then I heard something worse. I heard someone else breathing right outside the door, and it sounded exactly like the heavy, slow breathing I heard from inside the first room. It went on for almost a full minute. I wanted to run or call someone, but my phone was across the room on the desk and I was too scared to move. Then I heard a gentle knocking sound. Not with knuckles, but like someone pressing their palm against the door softly. They were feeling the door, not knocking. Eventually the breathing stopped and the wheels squeaked again as the cart was pushed slowly down the hallway. I got up after a few minutes and looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty. The cart was gone too. I checked my phone and thought about calling the front desk again, but I felt like they would think I was crazy. I locked the chain on the door, pushed the chair against it, and sat awake for hours. I kept thinking about the first room and the breathing. I tried to convince myself it was just someone on my floor messing around. Early in the morning around sunrise, I finally left the room and went downstairs to check out. The woman at the desk was gone, and a man was there instead. I told him what happened, and he gave me a strange look. Then he said something that disturbs me to this day. He said they had not had a housekeeper on staff for the last week because the woman who used to work nights just stopped coming in. He explained that either he or whoever else was on front desk duty would have to clean the rooms in the meantime. He seems like there was something he was hiding from me to save face for the hotel. I asked him if the missing housekeeper had keys to the rooms, and he said yes, she did. I left immediately after and did not look back at the hotel. I kept thinking about how that woman at the desk said housekeeping had already been through all the rooms earlier that evening, even though no one had been hired for a week. I don't know if she made that up or if she actually thought the missing woman had done it, but the breathing I heard in the room and outside my door sounded too real, and the way the closet door moved on its own still makes me feel sick. I think someone had been hiding inside that room before I ever arrived. I think they were still hiding somewhere in the hotel while I slept. I work as a house person at a hotel. It's a mix of maintenance and housekeeping. My job is to mostly help the front desk, which mainly involves me fixing guests' appliances and bringing them supplies. Another one of my jobs is to keep our pool clean and stashed with towels, which is relevant to the story I'm about to share. This took place in summer of 2023. My boss hired a new front desk worker, which for privacy reasons, I'll call her Brianna. She was working the night shifts, so I had a schedule change to help her on nights. It was a Wednesday night, so for our hotel, means it was a dead night, basically no check-ins. Me and Brianna mostly just chatted for the night while we did our stuff, which led to me going to our pool. For a guest here, if you wanted to go swimming, you had to fill out a form which basically gives you all the rules, and you'll be handed a pool key. Our managers gave us employees master keys that can get you into basically anything in the hotel. I clicked the key onto the lock and the pool door unlocked, allowing me to head in. The pool has a storage room which we stash towels and also other stuff like chlorine and whatnot. I opened the storage room and grabbed towels, since I saw there was little to none on the rack. As I was bending down to grab one more towel, I heard something hit the water. I actually jumped because it startled the hell out of me, and it caused me to drop the towels. I rushed out back to the pool area and saw one of our lifesavers floating on